I've always been fascinated with conceptions of the future. It's a neat insight to a culture to see just how they envisioned it. These ideas are rooted not just in their knowledge of technology, but their general optimism, or pessimism in some cases. I like to think back on stories like From the Earth to the Moon, and other works of Jules Verne. That optimistic view of technology and the world at large, we see traces of it in his inspirations of movements like steampunk, which has its roots in the scientific romances of not only Jules Verne, but other early science fiction writers like H.G. Wells. I think among the most iconic of these retrofuturism movements is the science fiction works of the 60s and 70s. One of the most iconic American cartoons of the time period was The Jetsons. The show has what I would call a pretty optimistic view of the future, one in which technology has helped us to make our lives better. The characters drive floating cars and live in buildings that rest high above the ground. I will confess that I don't know too terribly much about the show, but I don't think that we really need to know much about it to understand the kind of future that it represents. The sense of optimism it encapsulates is a very clean and prosperous future. As we move closer to the modern day, that sense of optimism, both about technology and the future as a whole, largely goes away. Hell, even during the production of The Jetsons, I would argue this shift was happening. I mean, this show had a 20-year hiatus between the first and second seasons. The landscape of technology had pretty drastically changed between those 2 points. Nevertheless, it's a fascinating insight on what we thought would be possible in the future. I mean, hell, look at Back to the Future 2. We had such high hopes for the year 2015, and that was over 10 years ago. I still want that Black & Decker pizza maker, though I'm not really sure how practical it would be. I mean, shit, I'd just be eating the tiny pizzas. Think of how many calories you could consume at once. That's the real technology right there. Actually, if I'm picking anything, it's this train. Look at it. Yeah, that's the pinnacle of technology right there. What were we talking about again? My favorite retrofuturism movement is, without a doubt, cyberpunk. There are a couple reasons for this. The first is that much of the cyberpunk iconography is rooted in a very 80s visual aesthetic. Synthwave is a very common thing that I associate with the cyberpunk aesthetic, and hell, that's the entire brand for my YouTube channel. The way cyberpunk explores our relationship with technology is something that resonates with me pretty strongly. We live in an age where technology has been evolving more rapidly than any other period in history, and with that expansion has developed a whole host of new problems. Black Mirror, especially the earlier seasons, tackle this in a pretty interesting way. Unfortunately, I can't comment much on the later ones as I haven't really watched past season 4. The one that stands out to me in particular is the episode where you have to watch commercials or you get screamed at until you open your eyes again. And, well, the present is barely any less bleak than that. I think it should come as no shock that 2077 was a game that appealed to me. I love the visuals of it, I'm an FPS guy, and I like an open world. I know, I have very unique taste. I don't think I need to explain to anyone how divisive this game was when it came out. I mean, holy. I'm not even sure divisive is the right word. People just did not like this game. I can't really blame anyone either, especially if you owned a console. But that was 2020, and this is 2026. As of a few months ago, December 2025 marked the 5-year anniversary of this game. And after 5 years of the game's existence, a lot of changes have been made, and they've made no shortage of improvements in the process. With enough hindsight now, and my proclivity for making long-ass video essays, I decided now was as good a time as any to add my 2 cents into the millions of dollars worth of discussion about this game. Before we get started, I wanted to establish 2 things. One is that I will obviously be talking about the most important details in this game. This includes spoilers for the main game as well as Phantom Liberty. If you've not played either, I would encourage you to do so and then come back. The other thing I wanted to lead with before we begin was that this game is both incredibly violent and pretty explicit. I don't intend on shying away from it either, so if that's not something you're comfortable with, then this probably isn't the video for you. Now that we've settled that, it's time to talk about one of the most infamous games of the last decade.
Good morning, Night City! Yesterday's body count lottery rounded out to a solid and sturdy 30. 10 out of Haywood, thanks to unabated gang wars. 1 officer down, so I guess you're all screwed, cause the NCPD will not let that go.
I think it's important that before we go any further in this essay, that we know where I stand with this game going into things. I know a lot of people didn't like this game when it came out, and while I can't fault them for it, I can't say that I shared that experience. There was a ton of hype surrounding this game prior to its release. I mean, they announced it back in 2013. People had a lot of time to get excited. There were many dev interviews, trailers, this Keanu thing that became a fuck-ass meme. Now, for just a moment, I want you to put all of that aside. We'll come back to talk about all of this, believe you me, but for now, I want you to ignore it. I want to tell you a story of this game from my own perspective. In 2020, I knew almost nothing about the game. I hadn't seen a single advertisement, a single interview. I knew about the Keanu breathtaking thing, but that was because people kept making terrible memes about it. That's basically cheating. In spite of my total lack of surrounding knowledge, I still knew the game was coming out, thanks Steam. I bought the game the day it came out and spent the next 3 days straight playing through it, right smack dab in the middle of finals week at my university. It was COVID, the bar was low, I pretty much passed. My point is that I played through the 1.0 version of this game, literally the day it came out, with zero knowledge of the community or any discussion of the game's features and expectations. And you know what? I had a ton of fun. I completed a ton of the side content. I even did the final mission a couple different times to get multiple endings. I had a great time playing the game, and once I completed it, I decided to see what the community had been up to. So I went to Reddit, my first mistake, and I searched up Cyberpunk 2077, my second mistake. I learned pretty quickly that I did not have the same experience as everyone else, that people were actually quite mad about the game, and I felt very out of place. I felt like I had missed something, that I had been too generous with the game, and others had seen something that I hadn't. There are a couple things to note here to add some context to my story. One is that I played the game on PC, and one of the major issues with the game's console performance was notoriously abysmal. It ran like ass on last-gen consoles. This was made extra funny because there was a special edition PS4 that came with the game, and I feel very bad for anyone who purchased that and then tried to experience the game on release that way. I also have a very powerful PC, which undoubtedly helped to mitigate the performance issues that the game was suffering from. I think there were two major factors at play here. The first is that I consider myself someone who's pretty easily content. I tend to really only have two categories under which things fall. There's not a lot of middle ground. Even if something is middling, if I had a semi-positive experience and didn't actively hate it, then it falls into the category of good in my mind. I think that was also probably just me straight up ignoring the times the game wasn't working, because looking back on my first playthrough, I genuinely don't remember having that many technical issues from the game, and I really doubt that I got that lucky. The other thing is that I'm someone who's played a lot of Bethesda games, and the bar for polish on those things is pretty low. They're fun games, don't get me wrong, and this whole thing really should be a story for another time, but you do a lot of handwave playing through one, especially if you don't use community patches. The other thing was that because I had no knowledge of the game's promises through trailers, interviews, early gameplay, etc., I didn't know what people expected from this game. I had a vague knowledge of it, and that was it. I would consider this a net positive for me, but I also view myself as an anomaly. It undoubtedly made my experience better to just experience the game for what it was. But you can't market a game that way. People, normal people, need to have expectations for this sort of thing. If they're going to spend their money on it, then they need to know what they're getting. I feel like I got lucky, or maybe unlucky in that sense, but I guess I won't complain about enjoying a game other people didn't like. Now, rest assured, I don't intend to just handwave people's concerns and criticisms. I just wanted to lead this whole thing off by talking about the fact that I quite like the game, and always have. But with that out of the way, let's talk about why people were so damn mad. I don't want to dwell on this chapter for a particularly long period of time. Many other people have gone through and talked about this game's tumultuous start, and I don't really want to spend a lot of time rehashing it, but I think it's important we have at least some context for why people were so mad at this game upon its release. So I'm going to try my best to give you all the abridged version of the story, and I know that in doing so, I'll probably leave a lot out. If you would like to learn more, I'll try to link relevant videos in the description. I think these are pretty interesting videos and that are definitely worth checking out. Cyberpunk 2077 was announced way back in 2012. In a Eurogamer article interview with Cyberpunk's creator Mike Pondsmith, he talks about how CDPR ended up getting his approval to create this game. He speaks a lot about how he did not intend to let them license the game. He had figured they were an incredibly small studio operating out of a broom closet, but he changed his mind once he took the trip to their studio in Poland. He says the thing that changed his mind the most was how much they knew about the setting, more so than he did in some areas. The quote I liked the most was when he impressed upon them just how shocked he was to see what they knew. The article says that CDPR responded, "We had communism, and we had cyberpunk." And that, Mike Pondsmith said, sealed it for us.
When I see people criticize the game, I can't help but think of the passion that went into it. I think people were probably a little too harsh on CD Projekt Red when it came to accusing them of different things, but there is still valid criticism of this game, and believe me, we'll get there.
The first trailer drops in 2013, and I mean, there's not a ton to say about it. It's a teaser trailer that would ultimately be released 7 years before the game would even be in the correct release year. It covers nothing about the plot of the game, which likely didn't exist at the time, and really only gives us a glimpse at what the game would resemble. And I do mean resemble. But that's what a teaser trailer is. That's the point. Even a month after the trailer's release, it had already garnered 5 million views. And this was on 2012 YouTube, a time where this feat was still incredibly remarkable.
Not that I'm saying it wouldn't be now, but the landscape was different. Smosh was the most subscribed channel at the time, and they hadn't even cracked 10 million subs yet. The game had eyes on it almost immediately is what I'm trying to get at, and those eyes did not go away with time.
CD Projekt Red would only grow more successful in the coming years with the release of The Witcher 3, a game that to this day sits on the top 10 best-selling games of all time, beating the likes of games like Overwatch, Stardew Valley, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow put together. The following years only built traction and increased the scope of the game, and more importantly, player expectations. In a 2019 interview with Alvin Liu, a focus of the article is how the game will run, primarily on consoles, something he says shouldn't be an issue due to their use of the Red engine, a tool of their own design. 2077 would ultimately run on the 4.0 version of Red engine, and we're definitely going to talk about all this coming up, but just remember this quote, it will certainly come up later.
Going back through these trailers, it's easy to see why people were so enamored by this game. I mean, it doesn't take much for me. I already liked it, but I can't help feel like we've learned nothing from the likes of No Man's Sky. That's a whole other can of worms we're not going to open, but the incredibly short version is that the game had many promises and an ever-increasing scope that could not meet with a looming deadline. The game couldn't deliver on many of its promises on launch, and many people felt there simply wasn't enough to do, made worse by the price tag the game had, being equivalent to a AAA title on its launch. I don't think I need to connect these dots for you, but in spite of the fact that No Man's Sky released in 2016, and that many of the trailers for the game were premiered in 2018 or later, it seems like people had learned very little when it comes to games industry trailers and the practices that surround them.
This is a practice that the industry as a whole has gotten away with for a long time, and boy is it contentious. I think nowadays people have become more wary, but I still don't think I'd argue the issue's ever been solved. It's hard not to give in to the hype. I think people want to believe the best for these things. It's hard not to see a well put together trailer and not get excited. I mean, that's the whole point.
But the use of pre-rendered cutscenes and creating areas specifically for demonstration purposes, allowing the devs to refine them into a pristine example of what the game could be, means that as long as the practice is used and accepted, you have to come into these things with a certain level of doubt.
Another big sticking point I remember was the idea of choosing your own life path. You would be able to set yourself down one of the game's origin paths, which would change the way you played the game. The whole thing was just sort of billed as a very GTA style, make your own way in this world kind of aesthetic.
It really reminds me of all those Kickstarter MMOs that tout themselves as letting you do anything you want, be anything you want. The whole thing is sold as the ultimate free-roaming gaming experience. And once you've heard about one of them, you've functionally heard about all of them. They're all interchangeable from start to finish.
Now, this game is not truly comparable to one of these scan MMOs. The game, first of all, had money, CDPR had resources, and the game has a focus. I don't really think it was a question of if the game was going to come out, but when. And when was indeed the question. It was a question so long it became a meme in its own right. It never quite reached the level that GTA 6 has when it comes to people being upset about delays, but people were still very clearly upset.
And while we're on the subject of GTA 6, it's kind of proved that we didn't learn much from this whole debacle either, as people continue to complain and berate Rockstar for their continual delays of the game. We don't learn from history. Every game is just another drop in the bucket of warnings we never seem to be able to heed, but it never actually matters. The internet's memory is simply not that long. One thing I noticed while watching all of these trailers was how the world became more refined the closer we get to release. This is another one of those statements that's pretty obvious, but it's a fascinating shift to see nevertheless. I mean, comparing the 2019 trailer and seeing just how much they'd honed the style of the game compared to the original is quite staggering. Part of that is just advancements in technology. You can make a better looking, more complex Night City nowadays than you could in 2012. And I'm thankful because, as we'll talk about later, Night City is my favorite part of the game by a substantial distance. The other thing I learned while watching these trailers is that I'm glad I never saw them before I played the game.
I talked about this a bit already, saying it didn't get my expectations up, and that's still true. I'll admit that I had still not watched them until writing this script, but now that I've done so, I've realized something about the 2019 one, in that it spoils a fairly big moment for the story, at least the first chapter of it. I can appreciate the desire to build hype, and make no mistake, it's a great scene, both in the game and in this trailer. But I think part of what makes it work so well is the fact that you don't know what's happening. The trick only works the first time. You can't be surprised by a powerful moment or a twist if you go into the piece of media knowing what's going to happen. And Cyberpunk isn't really the kind of game that appreciates repeat play sessions, at least not in the way where you get to analyze the game for other details. Coming back to it with all the pieces put together doesn't give you anything but a complete understanding of what's going to happen next. There's not a lot else to analyze in that regard.
I do think you can get something out of playing this game again. There are different builds you can try, there's always something else to do, but once you've seen the story, you've seen it. Let's talk about Baldur's Gate 3 for a second here to try and better articulate my point. Baldur's Gate 3 is a game all about solving a series of mysteries. This is a gross oversimplification of what's happening in the game, but a lot of it is you chasing one mystery after another. Once you've beaten the game the first time, when you go back through it and listen to the way people talk about the Prism, you can analyze their conversations and understand where the confusion comes from. You can see the situation as the Emperor does, as Vlaakith does, and it's interesting to see what they know and, more importantly, what they don't know. It paints their actions in another light. I don't ever think it justifies someone like Vlaakith, but it's interesting to see, given the context, where this miscommunication comes from, why she fails to understand something. You don't get that in 2077. Cyberpunk doesn't really lend itself to this kind of reflection. You're trying to figure out how to live, but there's not really any mystery. We already know how the relic works from the outset of the game. I'm not trying to criticize this element of the story. This aspect of replayability is not a requirement to create a compelling narrative. There are tons of games that tell an interesting story that have absolutely zero replayability whatsoever.
My point is that spoiling the powerful moments in this game kinda undermines the whole aspect of playing the game. And it makes me extra appreciative of the fact that I did not have any knowledge of the game going into it. This entire section is an exercise in explaining that the game had a lot of momentum in spite of delays and setbacks. People were annoyed by how long the game was taking to come out, but I don't know that it really harmed the momentum of the game in the process. If it did, I certainly didn't notice it. The idea of choice and freedom is a pretty common through-line in just about every piece of media I came across. Night City is repeatedly called the City of Dreams, encouraging the player to rise to the top, doing whatever it takes to make it in Night City, because the rewards are high.
And I do intend on talking about how that freedom panned out, but I have a question first. And I'm almost embarrassed that it's taken me this long to ask it. But what the hell is a cyberpunk? The year was 1988, and Mike Pondsmith created Cyberpunk 2013, which was published by his company R. Talsorian Games, making it the fourth game published by the company overall.
I actually found it somewhat difficult to find much about the actual source book from the 1988 version of the TTRPG. I was able to find Welcome to Night City, which is convenient because that's where everything takes place, so let's talk about that for a second. The book is pretty comprehensive in its introduction to not just Night City, but the timeline of the game as it exists at that point in time. Cyberpunk 2013 takes place, as I'm sure you'll be shocked to learn, in 2013. The book opens with a timeline of events that starts in 1991 and ends in what is then the present day. The guide then spends a fair amount of time going over technology in the modern day.
All of this is neat world building, but for the sake of our discussion, I don't think it's worth getting into. The book gives an introduction into running cyberpunk games, which essentially just boils down to my favorite piece of advice: don't be afraid to murder your players. Always sound. The next thing, and perhaps the most important for our discussion, is it gives us a quick introduction to Night City. The book makes a point of not defining where Night City is, as it wants you, the one running the game, to put it into terms that your players will understand, but adding the characters and ideas presented to us in 2013 to really allow your players to understand the location.
Now, maybe you don't live in a metropolitan area. That's okay. The creators have thought of that and presented us with a small sample of things to include in your version of Night City. Some of these are pretty recognizable to anyone who's played 2077 before. Arasaka Tower, Trauma Team, the Atlantis, the Afterlife. Interspersed with these fictional places are generic real-world locations like a city hall, college, library, things of that nature.
It shouldn't come as much of a shock just how much recognizable stuff is in this handbook. We already know just how impressed Mike Pondsmith was with CDPR, who clearly had a lot of experience with the game and even knew things about it that he had forgotten. The book even comes with a fun map of Night City, and it could not be any more different than the Night City we know 64 years in the future. Some of the names are recognizable, but the layout is fundamentally different. Now, this edition of the TTRPG is not the same one that the game is based on, so it makes sense that the city looks pretty different, especially because this is the first edition of the game, so there's still some revisions and whole changes you can make to help make the setting more intricate.
In an effort to help people get a better understanding of what the world looked like, and more importantly, acted like, the writers have included a story here called Never Fade Away, and some of you might be ahead of me, but I promise, all in good time. This story includes some of our key players in the cyberpunk world and includes many who play a part in 2077.
Rogue, Johnny Silverhand, and Alt Cunningham are all important characters in this story. The fun part is that it's actually designed to be run as a one-shot, so that's pretty interesting. Without the baseline rules though, I'm not entirely sure what all the numbers do and mean, but I suppose it's not really relevant for our sake. Reading through this was such a fascinating insight on the origins of the game. I was actually shocked to see just how much of what I knew about cyberpunk was still found in here. Now, looking through this book is very interesting, but like I mentioned, it's not the exact basis for 2077. In 1990, Cyberpunk's second edition was released, called Cyberpunk 2020. Finding these books was something of a challenge for me, but I was actually able to get a hold of a PDF of the base rule set for 2020, which I also learned is in the special edition bonus content of 2077.
Skimming through them, it's exactly what I thought it was, the rules for character creation in the Cyberpunk universe. How exactly they work compared to 2013's rules, I can't really say. The items I found from that era mostly took the form of supplemental stories like Welcome to Night City.
For the sake of our discussion though, the steps to create a character matter very little. It's largely the terminology that we care about. All of it has been imported straight from these books, which is not a shock and should not be. But because my frame of reference was these games, going through these books is a lot like the photo of Leo pointing and just being like, ah, I get that reference. The system for playing a character in a TTRPG is fundamentally different from the way a first-person shooter open-world RPG plays. Some games try to emulate the feeling of the tabletop game more than others. The skill tree system is commonplace among games and shares similarities to the classic character sheets from these style of games. Certain skills can influence dialogue options, depending on the necessary skill for that line of dialogue.
Not every conversation will include such an option. Why am I explaining this? The whole system is prevalent to the genre, and I feel as though I don't really have to explain this. At any rate, the video game and tabletop game and the TV show, which it kills me we don't get to talk about, I just couldn't justify it, all share one continuous canon. So these books do bear significance to the story of the games more so than just being the inspiration for them.
Mike Pondsmith worked with CDPR to create a timeline that bridged the gap between 2020 and 2077. It's actually nice to have this all in one complete timeline across all mediums because it's not really something you can say about other works in the genre.
When it comes to this game, I think the thing people are most familiar with is the game's initial launch. There have been countless compilations of the game's bugs and people talking about the massive backlash over the fact that the game just simply was not ready. I unfortunately don't have any actual recordings from my first experience playing the game, but I really doubt that it was all that different from anyone else's. I already talked about the fact that I had a very positive experience with the game, but I admit that I probably overlooked a good amount of stuff in my first run-through.
Once I learned about the community and how much vitriol there was surrounding the game, I noticed a lot more of the stuff that people were complaining about. The bugs, things not loading in properly, all of it. Finding a comprehensive list of bugs is probably more trouble than it's worth, but the fact that the first hotfix for the game took place one day after its release speaks volumes in my opinion. It's not an unsubstantial list either, ranging from quest-specific bugs to visual loading issues and even platform-specific ones.
Perhaps the most notable issue was the game's performance on consoles. That article I mentioned earlier talked about how the game's performance on consoles wouldn't suffer because of CDPR's use of the Red engine. Well, turns out that didn't really end up being true. The game definitely suffered substantially on the Xbox One and PS4, making it all the more amusing and unfortunate because the game also launched with a special collector's edition for the PS4. Now, people were very upset about the game, and I think part of this was deserved, but I'm gonna go to bat for the game here a little bit. I think part of the negativity was people working themselves into a frenzy. For as many negative reviews as the game got, I think that I was not alone in my enjoyment of the game right off the bat. Even the first day reviews for the game on Steam and on websites like Metacritic still have people who enjoyed the game, people like me.
The standards people have vary wildly. There's no concrete acceptable definition for the state a game should be in order to consider it playable. There's a point at which most people would turn a game off because it's too unfinished, as we've seen from people's perception of this game, but it's not as simple as it would be for, any kind of shovelware title. 2077 has a lot going on. It has a lot going for it, if for no other reason than the game had tons of people behind it. Now, whether or not you think the game was fun on launch is up for debate, but that's kind of the point. We can sit here and actually discuss the fact that while the game may have been flawed on launch, people like myself did enjoy the game. Finding someone who enjoyed Chicken Shoot would be a much harder pitch, and so I understand that people thought this was the worst game of 2020, but I would argue that's a lot higher of a bar to clear than anyone realized. And I'm sure that some of these positive reviews are fake. I don't doubt that. I just don't want to paint the game as this underappreciated gem that was super good and people really mean to, because that's not a fair assessment of the product. But I think this street goes both ways. I think that some of these reviews are written in bad faith. People who worked themselves up into a frenzy and wrote about a review of the game without really engaging in it, if they even engaged with it at all.
Now, to guess the ratio on these two things would be pure speculation on my part. I mean, more so than I've already been speculating. I don't think it would be fair of me to draw sweeping conclusions about the launch of the game, especially considering I haven't really done the research necessary to do that. The game was divisive on launch, and while I enjoyed it a lot, there were many who didn't, and I think all of this is worth taking into account before we truly dive into the world of Night City and 2077 as a whole.
At this point, I think we have finally set the stage properly to take an in-depth look at the story of the game. I do enjoy the story for this game. Well, we'll talk about it.
In line with the 2020 source material, the first thing you'll do is choose a life path. There are 3 to choose from: Nomad, Street Kid, and Corpo. This was another major talking point about the game leading up to its release. It was the idea that you could choose your origin, play through the introduction, and this life path would influence the way you went through the game. In practice, it's a little less nuanced than that. The main thing your life path changes is the opening of the game, the 20 to 30 minute introduction that puts you in the position for the first mission and the game's tutorial.
Now, it does impact a little more than that. Your life path choice influences dialogue options, giving you access to unique ones that can either give you more details during a conversation or even allow you to resolve things in a different manner than you might have otherwise. Each life path also has a specific quest associated with it that you get access to later on in the game.
I've played through 2 of the life paths the game has to offer. I have yet to do the Nomad life path, so for the sake of discussion, I booted up a new game to try and run through it. However, the path I chose when playing through the game to write this essay was Corpo, as it's my favorite life path in the game. I chose the same path when I played the game for the first time, and I picked it back then because it seemed the most interesting to me. I'm a big fan of political intrigue in media, and there's no better setting than that than working for a big corporation. I also hoped that I'd have more money if I started as a corpo. I was unfortunately wrong on that last count, but you do come awfully close.
Having played through the game multiple times, I do think the Corpo path is the most interesting from a narrative perspective. I think it gives V the most character growth to being a cog in the machine to being the person who totally dismantles it. You also have an insight on how these companies operate, having been a fairly high-ranking part of one for an indeterminate amount of time. We'll talk about it in a second.
When you're dealing heavily with corporations later in the story, I think it works really well as a contrast, a reminder of how far V has come in such a short time. When I see someone like Hanako Arasaka, I think about how that used to be you. The contrast becomes very clear, and I think it's very interesting. I'll also reiterate my spoiler warning right now for anyone who wants to give this game a shot, as we will definitely be talking about spoilers pretty much exclusively from this point forward. No matter which path you choose, you end up working with Jackie as a merc in Night City. The how and why varies from path to path. This is part of why people didn't love the life path system. No matter which one you chose, all roads lead to Rome. The first thing I want to lead this section with is talking about a weird discrepancy with V's age.
V's age has changed a couple times, and it kind of made some weird lore there for a bit. V's current age is 27, which I think makes the most sense, especially for the life path I chose in this playthrough. 27 is old enough that I think you could hold a decent position with an Arasaka counterintelligence, and V's age matters less in the other life paths, as they aren't necessarily something as age-specific as a job is. The problem stems from the fact that at one point V's age had been changed to 23, which consolidated a lot of their life experience into a much shorter time frame. Now, as far as the game is concerned, this information doesn't really ever come up. To my knowledge, V's age doesn't come up at any point during the game, and if it does, it's in a very minor way. This point isn't significant for its impact, but rather as a symptom of making some unusual decisions. This isn't something that I think comes up a lot, but it will definitely come up again.
This game has a very similar story structure to The Witcher 3. It's hard not to keep bringing up this game. It was made by the same developers after all. The story starts with you being given a task, and then being told multiple different places you need to go, and largely being able to do them in any order. Now, Cyberpunk doesn't immediately start here. We do have to do what I feel is essentially the prologue. I don't know what I'd actually count as the prologue, but it sets in motion the rest of the events that are the actual plot of the game. We're barred from leaving the area of Watson until we get through the first act of the game, which is all about us working together with Jackie Wells, who in our playthrough was a longtime friend before we lost our money and job at Arasaka, turning into a life of mercenary work as a replacement. We first have to save a woman named Sandra Dorset from some scavs, a loose group of people who harvest cyberware from kidnapped individuals. This mission serves as the game's tutorial. I skipped the actual tutorial because I played this game way too much. The first act is largely split into two parts. The first is our work with Dexter Deshawn, who we get introduced to as a hot fixer in Night City. The act of working with him is seen as our ticket to the major leagues, something Jackie says repeatedly. He's planning some massive heist, and we have to go around obtaining various pieces of information and items to prepare for the heist. Honestly, this entire act is just one long tutorial, as the game still has to teach you new mechanics. When meeting with the woman who's organizing the heist, Evelyn Parker, you have to delve into a recording she made of the penthouse you're going to break into in the second half of this opening. The way you do this is through the game's brain dance mechanic. The first thing the game does is make you go through a brain dance tutorial in order to understand how the system works, and once you do that, you get into the actual memory you're supposed to be analyzing.
Now, originally, this was an unskippable tutorial that you had to play through every time if you wanted to start the game anew, and my god was it annoying. At least nowadays you have the option of skipping the tutorial one, but the regular brain dances aren't really any more interesting. I get the logistics. It's a neat mechanic that allows us to view memories in a more interactive way. The intent seems to be that it gives us something to do during them.
The problem I have is that it isn't just something to do while viewing them. You're often required to rewind, change visual layers, and pause to analyze certain details, which turns what would be a pretty brief cutscene into something that's like 3 times longer, and that feels like a lowball estimate. Most of this first act is a build-up to Dex's mission, a heist on the Arasaka-owned Konpeki Tower, and while it's not my favorite part of the game, it really starts to improve once we get inside the hotel. But before we get to really have any fun, we first have to spend 10 minutes playing a point-and-click adventure, moving this little robot around by watching it on this camera system. Once you do that, you finally get access to Yorinobu Arasaka's penthouse, where things take a pretty drastic turn. While trying to steal the relic, Saburo Arasaka, the father of Yorinobu and head of the Arasaka Corporation, as well as the Emperor of Japan, shows up at the hotel to confront his son. This forces us to hide quickly inside the big glass television thing in the room, and what follows is an argument with father and son, which ends with Yorinobu killing his father in cold blood, seemingly in a fit of rage.
I wish to put the hotel on lockdown. May I ask why?
Saburo Arasaka has been murdered.
Code Red initiated.
Having to stage the whole thing as an accident, he orders the hotel be put on lockdown before leaving the penthouse, and now V and Jackie are left to figure out how the hell to escape the hotel with the item they were tasked with stealing, a highly expensive prototype known as the Relic. What does it do? We're not really sure yet. All hell breaks loose, and we have to witness our eye-in-the-sky Netrunner be killed as T-Bug is caught by Arasaka security.
The exact moment this entire section clicks for me is the minute we finally make it into the penthouse. That's when this really becomes a heist mission. That's when we finally get to realize the stakes of what we're doing. We do all this reconnaissance, all this planning, and even manage to sneak our way into the hotel, but it just feels like going through the motions. The stakes of getting caught up to this point are fairly insignificant. This goes out the window once we're about to steal this priceless piece of technology, and we really pass the point of no return once we witness the Emperor's death.
Our plan to escape via the outside of the building fails when we're spotted, forcing us to dive some 30 feet, damaging the container of the relic and injuring both of us in the process. Because the relic's container is no longer stable, it forces us to do something about it. Seemingly out of options, an injured Jackie slots the relic into his neural port, an act that has no seeming effect on him. I love battling my way out of Konpeki Plaza, both visually and from a gameplay perspective. The red light that illuminates most of our escape route, the warning alarm blaring in the background as the woman instructs hotel guests on the procedure in order to stay safe.
Attention. Code Red has been initiated throughout Konpeki Plaza. Please remain in your rooms and follow all instructions given by staff.
It's a pretty intense moment that finally matches the stakes I've been waiting for.
Maybe the build-up makes it that much sweeter, but I don't think you always need that build-up in order to create tense scenes like this. The question then becomes, could we have started this game in media res, in the same vein as something like Detroit Become Human? A game whose opening scene very much reminds me of the Konpeki Plaza heist in terms of visual feel and similarity. You can try and sneak out stealthily, avoiding Arasaka security, but I've never managed to do that, and where's the fun in that anyway?
We manage to battle our way out, escaping in a specialty taxi, but Jackie is worse for wear than we are. He's pale as a ghost, and fearing that the relic will suffer irreparable damage before we can deliver it if he dies with it slotted in, he gives it to us. As we try to get him to stay awake, thinking of Misty, Jackie's girlfriend, he dies in the seat next to us. We have to ride with him to the meeting point with Dexter Deshawn. The only two living people that have been a part of this operation are now me and him. We enter the motel room to see him watching the news. Our break-in of Arasaka is all over every channel, and the death of the Emperor has been placed squarely on our shoulders. We can either lie to Dexter or tell him the truth about the relic, but it makes no difference. He begins to formulate an escape for us, instructing us to get cleaned up as we're covered in blood. Whether it's Jackie's, ours, or Arasaka agents, it matters little. We go get cleaned up, being forced to push past the fact that so many people died for our mission. That Jackie died for our mission. V looks themselves in the mirror, face to face with the one responsible. But it doesn't look like them, like us. Surely I'm not covered in this much blood, I think. In a moment of anger, I smash the mirror before returning to Dex, who has his goon restrain us. He has a different plan in mind. When we first meet Dexter Deshawn, he asks us if we preferred to live a quiet life or to go out in a blaze of glory. Whatever we tell him in that moment matters little, because it's here where the question gets asked again, except this time Dex is asking it to himself, saying that he's decided to choose the quiet life.
Dexter portrayed himself as some hotshot fixer, assigning us this incredibly dangerous, high-stakes mission. But as soon as things get dicey, something that was incredibly likely to happen, he reveals his true self, a coward.
V tries to yell at him to no avail. Dex pulls the trigger, immediately killing us. Title card.
To say that this opening is a slow burn would be categorically untrue, but it does take some time to build to where it wants to go. This is what convinced me to give this game my time. Murdering your protagonist is an incredibly effective hook, and I have an affinity for stories that aren't afraid to kill off important characters, as I think it makes for both a more realistic narrative as well as a more impactful one. Character death is a very good way to make a character deal with the trauma of a situation in a way that the audience can almost assuredly relate to. Unless you're like 7 and haven't lost anyone important in your life. This whole heist, this elaborate plan to steal the relic, a job consisting of 2 small-time mercenaries managed by someone who fancies himself as a big shot. I mean, it's a miracle we got as far as we did. I didn't expect this heist to go well for us, because it's a video game and pretty early on in one too. I mean, I've seen the hero's journey roadmap, I've seen the general structure of a story. I just assumed this will be something of a by-the-numbers adventure, and while it has its moments of being one, it is by and large not. There are no happy endings in Night City, and Jackie learns that the hardest way possible. Something we're left to reckon with. I spoke earlier about being glad that I had not interacted with any of the promotional material that had been made to promote the game, be that trailers, developer interviews, or gameplay footage. The reason this is at all important to our discussion is because one of the trailers features a moment that contains the exact scene I just described. Dex and V are discussing what to do about the failed mission, but first instructs him to get cleaned up. He smashes the mirror in frustration before fighting Dex's hustle and ultimately being shot and presumably killed. I think part of what makes this scene so good is the surprise factor. I wasn't expecting Dex to just outright try and kill us, to decide that he'd chosen the quiet life after all. That feeling of being overwhelmed, of sheer helplessness as we are murdered in cold blood by the very man that hired us, is what makes this scene. And if you've seen the trailer, then you already know what's coming. I mean, it's an effective trailer, don't get me wrong. It's a powerful moment that draws people into the game. It drew me into the game. But the surprise only works the first time. The trick doesn't work again, and to waste it on the trailer feels like such a disservice to the game that it almost makes me mad that someone could have wasted such a major twist and had it been spoiled for them by a trailer.
We resume the game from the point of view of someone else, catching glimpses of their life as a rocker, culminating in them launching an assault to plant a nuclear bomb in Arasaka Tower. This act is something that ultimately gets Johnny Silverhand captured and killed. However, he and the others do succeed in planting the bomb and detonating it, completely obliterating Arasaka Tower. After this glimpse into this man's life, we have a couple scenes to get through in order to truly start Act 2. We manage to regain consciousness to find we're in a landfill, having been dumped here by Dex. The man responsible for forcing him to find us is the same man from Konpeki Plaza who almost spotted us in the large glass screen. We don't have the chance to get our own retribution though, he takes care of that for us. The man takes us back to Victor, the Ripper Doc who we're friends with from the first act of the game, who manages to stabilize us. We also get formally introduced to Keanu Reeves, portraying the late great Johnny Silverhand, the same man whose memories we just witnessed.
Johnny's consciousness is also occupying our mind at the same time as ours, something that I'm sure would be incredibly trippy if it was actually possible. Vic explains to us that the chip we stole and slotted into our mind began to function when we died. It assumed we were dead and began working to replace our consciousness with the one on the relic. In this case, a dead terrorist rocker boy.
This finally gives us control of our character to start Act 2 in earnest. And I'm not sure if my brief description of these events properly conveys just how long it is before we get control of our character back again to roam Night City. This whole scene is like 40 minutes long, and part of the reason why is because in spite of the prologue, the game still has a few more things it needs to dump on us before we start.
Make no mistake, the prologue is incredibly effective, and it does get there eventually. But the real plot is about us trying to stop ourselves from dying a second time, being replaced with Johnny's engram and erasing us. This whole scene feels at odds with the game's idea of freedom, that the game has to just throw up its hands in defeat and admit that the best way to convey all this information is just to tie the player down and exposit all of it in one go.
From here, we meet with Takamura, the man from the tower, who basically sets the structure for the entirety of what I'll consider Act 2. Act 2 is by far the longest part of the game. It basically encompasses everything that isn't the prologue and the final mission. There are 3 primary quest lines to tackle, and you can tackle them in any order. In fact, the game will encourage you to do exactly that, but we'll talk about what I mean in a second. Takamura lays the whole thing out in Tom's diner. The first is helping Takamura get in touch with Hanako Arasaka, sister to Yorinobu. He intends on proving the deception of Yorinobu and his lie about the Emperor being poisoned. He also believes that Arasaka, as builders of the relic, will be able to help disentangle us from Johnny as a way to return the favor. One of the other 2 paths is tracking down the man who designed the relic, a man named Anders Hellman. The issue there is that Anders no longer works at Arasaka, and Takamura doesn't really know how to get a hold of him, something that becomes our responsibility. Lastly, we attempt to seek out Evelyn Parker, who was the woman who originally contacted Dexter Deshawn with this task, who had been the, quote, doll for Yorinobu getting a layout of the penthouse.
Takamura rescued us, agreed to help us in the first place because he needs to bring our testimony to Hanako Arasaka. He intends on shedding light on the fact that Saburo was murdered by his own son, and not whatever lie he told the board.
We half-heartedly agree to his plan without really committing to anything, as well as have other discussions with Johnny Silverhand, who, shocker, vehemently opposes the idea of us helping Takamura at all. All of this finally gives us control of our character again, and we have a number of plot points to take on now, or if you're me, start running around Night City doing NCPD side hustler objectives, but that's a discussion for another section of this video.
Now, I mentioned the fact that you're expected to take on these quests in any order you like, and the game kind of forces you to do that. More often than not, after you complete one or more quests in any real storyline, you'll be given with the instruction to wait for someone to call you. In fact, the quest Takamura gives you to start with is you waiting for him to call again to begin setting up his own plan, meaning right off the bat you're expected to track down some of the other leads you've got. This creates an effect where you're constantly bouncing around between characters and ideas of the city as you try and find any potential lead at getting Johnny out of your head, saving your own life in the process. This helps to convey the manic energy that I expect V's internal monologue looks like, someone trying to play it cool while desperately searching for an answer.
This also has the side bonus of giving the player an out when it comes to exploring the world at their own pace, as there are large chunks of forced downtime between main missions, which allows you to pursue just about anything you'd like with at least a little bit of impunity. I do say a little bit, however, and I think that I should broach something that I consider to be an important subject before we go any further.
A common issue video games have to balance, particularly open-world RPGs with a heavy focus on exploration, is the sense of urgency. A lot of these kinds of games are always on some kind of timetable, which, makes sense. It's a video game with a narrative, and you want the player to feel invested, so there have to be stakes. The problem comes with a question. How do you give players the freedom to explore this world with the looming context that they're on a time-sensitive mission? The answer? You don't. Most stories have no actual sense of urgency, only implied urgency. They don't actually care when you get around to completing the main story. If you fucked off, did every side objective and little collectathon, and then came back to the main mission after doing all of these things, nothing would change. This is largely a sacrifice that comes as a result of the medium these stories are in. You're expected to just suspend your disbelief for these issues because it would make the game unfulfilling to play otherwise. It'd really undercut the whole point of creating an open-world RPG in the first place. This trope is pretty common in open-world games, but it's especially apparent in this one. The driving force of the narrative is the fact that we're slowly being taken over by the construct, overriding our consciousness with Johnny's engram. We're constantly reminded of the fact that time is incredibly limited, that we're going to die again unless we do something. Except, not really. Most of the incidents where we're being affected by the relic, either by throwing up or straight up blacking out, are scripted events in specific quests. If you just roamed Night City taking on gigs and NCPD scanner missions, you'd never run out of time. The suspension of disbelief is higher in this game than something like Skyrim, where Alduin is a threat, but the timeline isn't as clearly established. I think the game does make an effort to reconcile the issue. Like I said, the game will activate the relic during various quests, both main and side, so as long as you're playing through important missions, the game does make an effort to remind you. The problem is, there's only so much you can do. If I just choose to wait 60 days in a row, nothing will happen.
Now, while the game may want me to tackle these stories in an intersecting web-like order, that'd be really annoying from a structural standpoint in this essay, as well as a pain to edit. So rather than do that, let's just cover the 3 angles of attack in broad strokes before we talk about Act 3. Calling Evelyn Parker helps us not at all, so instead we reach out to Judy Alvarez, the woman who was helping Evelyn in Act 1 by editing the braindance scene we went through. Judy is thoroughly fed up with Evelyn, having seen how massively this whole plan blew up in our faces. Still, she directs us in the right direction before asking us to check on her once we find her. The first leg of this quest is all about trying to track down Evelyn because, shocker, it's not actually that easy. I don't intend on going through this entire questline beat for beat because it'd take way too long, but I do want to quickly talk about Clouds, which is the place that Evelyn works at. While we're here, we need to get inside. The easiest way to do that is to simply enter the place as a client. Clouds is a place where people work as something they call dolls, which have behavioral chips that take over when they interact with clients. It's a strip club. It's a personalized strip club where the people doing the work don't actually have to remember anything. Anyways, when we meet the doll we're assigned, instead of anything sexual, we simply have a conversation with them about our life and our fears. This is how we learned V's name for the first time, which is Vincent if you choose male V and Valerie if you choose female V. V insists that they do not call them by their name, and honestly, the name doesn't really come up again except for some of the endings later on in the game. This whole conversation is so very interesting because it allows us a level of control over V that is both completely inconsequential and very immersive. Ugh, I hate using that word, but I couldn't think of anything better.
Something I've neglected to mention is how this game plays onto my greatest fear in life. The idea that you could change into someone unrecognizable, to forget everything and simply not realize it. Alzheimer's and dementia are my greatest fears in life, and while V's situation is not exactly comparable, it is remarkably close. This is a concept that'll crop up multiple times throughout the game, not just in conversations about V and Johnny's situation either.
This discussion about V's fears of becoming someone else can be directly addressed during your conversation with either Angel or Sky, depending on which one you chose. Our search for Evelyn teaches us that a malfunction occurred while she was working, one that appeared to be incredibly sophisticated. After being taken to a Ripper dock, he then in turn pawns her off to someone who intended on scrolling XBDs, the in-universe equivalent of a snuff film. All of this culminates in us finding her, thankfully still alive, but deeply traumatized and in Judy's care for the time being. Judy does manage to extract 2 memories from Evelyn's mind, which tells us that Evelyn was contacted herself by someone else to get into Yorinobu's penthouse to do reconnaissance with the intent to steal the relic. Unfortunately, we can't quite make out who this person is, but we can piece together that they likely work for the Voodoo Boys in Pacifica, the most rundown area of Night City. The original plans for the area were a billionaire's playground. The second memory tells us that not only are they interested in the relic, but they know exactly what's on it, saying Silverhand will lead them to Alt, a name we technically haven't heard yet. There's not much more we can learn from Evelyn, but we have a new direction to head, Pacifica. And by now the game will have given us at least one contact there, Pacifica's fixer, Mr. Hands.
Listen, that's just what he's called. What do you want from me?
Mr. Hands arranges for us to meet up with the Voodoo Boys to get in contact with one Maman Brigitte. When we get to the church from the brain dance, we're instructed to go and find someone named Placide. Placide, as it turns out, has no intention of letting us speak to Brigitte, but instead wants us to do a job for him, eliminating a Netwatch agent that is holed up inside the Grand Imperial Mall. This mission is not my favorite because it's a heavily stealth-focused one. The first one I really came across in my playthrough. Now, you could technically just plow right through the mall. To my knowledge, there's nothing stopping you except for the fact that there are dozens of animals who currently inhabit the place. While I didn't really want to stealth my way through this place, I did it anyway because I thought the alternative would take too long. In the theater of the mall, we find a Netwatch agent by the name of Bryce Mosley. Bryce tries to reason with us, saying that the Voodoo Boys are using us, and have every intention to kill us as soon as we outlive our usefulness. The amusing thing is that we possess the exact thing they're looking for, but when we try to tell Placide this, he does not believe us. The agent offers to help us by removing the virus if we side with him, and I usually choose to, not because I like him or even Netwatch, but because I want to fuck the Voodoo Boys over, and this is the easiest way to do that. He also agrees to release Brigitte and T.I. Neptune from stasis, the very reason we were sent here in the first place. With that out of the way, we're finally allowed to meet with Maman, the woman who contacted Evelyn, who immediately clocks the fact that we possess the biochip, and if she can't have it for herself, the next best move is to use us instead. Taking us into their Netrunner lair, Brigitte reveals why she needed the relic in the first place, as a method of reaching out to Alt Cunningham, being aware of the relationship she and Johnny had. She needs us to enter the net as well in order to best interact with the construct, punching a hole through the black wall in the process. Before we can meet Alt, we first get another taste of Johnny's memories, more specifically a glimpse into his past relationship with Alt Cunningham, culminating with her getting kidnapped by Arasaka as a method of recruitment.
Now, I've been sitting on a piece of information for a little while here, and that is, of course, that the story of Alt's capture and attempted rescue is taken straight from the source books of Cyberpunk 2013, characters and everything. Now, there are some differences. The main one in my mind is that we don't get all these moments of conflict between her and Johnny. That's largely a fabrication of the game. The best example of this dichotomy is how much Johnny knows about Alt's career. In the game, he's totally clueless to the fact that Alt is among the greatest netrunners in Night City, and the designer of Soulkiller. Johnny doesn't know she built Soulkiller in the original source material either, but he does at least know what she does for a living, and who she worked for. Johnny in the game also believes that kidnapping Alt was a way of getting back at him, which Thompson tells him is simply not true. He has no such belief in the original source material. All of this paints us a picture of the fact that 2077's Johnny is much more selfless and self-centered than the one in 2013. This is a discussion for later, but just keep it in the back of your mind again for the time being.
So Alt gets kidnapped, and Johnny sets up the plan to get her back from Arasaka Tower, but shows up too little too late to save her from Soulkiller being used on her as well. You know what? Fuck it. Let's stop for a second to talk about Soulkiller.
Soulkiller is a program/AI designed to essentially harvest the soul of whoever you use it on. It extracts their mind, their consciousness, and stores it in what is effectively a prison. The prison Arasaka keeps is called Mikoshi, something that Johnny will reference multiple times later, so if it comes up again, this is what he means.
Soulkiller is used on Alt, but she manages to flee into the net at some point, so she's no longer being held in Mikoshi. This is when we encounter her beyond the Black Wall, the thing designed to keep rogue AIs out of the new net. This is also the reason that the Netrunner is trying to shut down the Voodoo Boys' plan. They want to pierce the Black Wall because they believe that rogue AIs will eventually take over, and they want to curry favor before it happens. The problem with them meeting Alt is that V has led the Netwatch agent right to her, as when he fixed our virus, he also planted a tracker on us. Alt kills all the Voodoo Boys in an effort to protect herself from Mosley, but she does at least bring us with her to talk. Alt, while harboring no warm feelings about Johnny, agrees to help us provided we can get her access to Mikoshi. When we leave the network, we see the corpses of every runner, including Maman. And you know what? Serves you right for trying to fuck me over. I'll pick Bryce every time if it means you die. Anyway, we have to fight our way out of the Voodoo's hideout, and that concludes this branch of the questline. Alt will help us if we can find a way into Mikoshi. Not a bad deal.
This is probably my favorite of the three main quest lines, and most of it is because of the dynamic between Alt and Johnny. We get a pretty good grasp on Johnny's history with women in this game, particularly his relationship with Rogue and Alt. And while his relationship with Rogue is explored in depth in the present, we get a much better picture of his history with Alt than we do with Rogue. I don't feel we ever really get to know what Rogue saw in him, what kept her from just kicking him out. The closest I think we get is in Never Fade Away, but even then, his focus is primarily on Alt. However, this is a discussion better had in a different section of this video, but I feel it's at least important that we bring it up now so that we know when we come back to it later.
With one questline complete, that just leaves the other two. In an effort to track down Anders Hellman, we head back to the Afterlife to meet with Rogue Amendirez. The last time we were here, Jackie was toasting to hitting the major leagues. And now we're back for the first time, here to clean up the mess we created for ourselves. After paying Rogue 10,000 eddies, damn, fuck you, girl. Sorry, that was just a reflex. After paying Rogue 10,000 eddies and being told to wait a day, go do something else, you piece of shit, Rogue puts us in contact with one Panam Palmer, someone who will help us take down the Kang Tao AV, another company within this world, the one Hellman now works for, it's not important. Rogue has learned about their plan to transport Hellman out of the area. She also gives us the information we'll need to convince Panam to help us, the location of Panam's vehicle. The fact that Rogue has this information on her own mercenary, as well as the fact that she got her car stolen by her partner, paints a very clear picture about the kind of person that Rogue is. But we can't really turn our noses at anyone's help right now, much less someone as powerful as her. We call Panam, explaining that we know her issue and exactly how to help her, but we need help with something. She instantly sets a meeting point for us. Panam is none too pleased with us though, immediately insisting that we tell her the location of her car. Eventually, we instead settle on a deal, however. Get the car back, let her make her delivery, and she'll help us down an AV straight out of Night City airspace. I mean, all in all, this is a pretty spectacular deal for us, I mean, come on. We tell Panam that her stuff can be found in Rocky Ridge, immediately heading there in order to set up a plan of attack before the scabs can show up. We set up a meticulous plan to steal the car out from under them. With the plan successfully executed, and Panam now having her car back, she's decided that the next step is to get revenge on Nash, which I ultimately agree to help her with. This starts us down the path of helping Panam as a part of our relationship with her and its associated quests, but it's entirely optional. We also get our first introduction to the Nomads. The Aldecaldos are the family that Panam had left due to her conflicts with their leader, but she still has relationships with the people who live here, mainly Mitch and Scorpion, as well as some of her belongings, seeing as how she comes back to collect a handful of things. Now that we've assisted Panam, we sell her merch to the 6th Street gang and celebrate our success. Panam then gets to work trying to help us, coming up with a plan to effectively create a massive EMP by overloading a power station just outside Net City airspace and Kang Tao's immediate range of response. This plan does end up coming to fruition, with a little bit of assistance. Downing this thing causes the Aldecaldos to converge on it to take whatever's inside, except we know it's pretty heavily guarded, but are unable to warn them due to the EMP. Rushing into nab Hellman while also trying to save the Aldecaldos, we see that they're pretty readily dispatched, but maybe there's a chance that they're alive.
This section's always a mild pain in the ass for me because it's all about trying to kite all of these bots without dying, and you can't get too close to the AV without those stupid turrets firing on you. So you basically have to beeline it there in order to shut them off, or just stay the fuck away.
Anyways, doing all of that reveals to us that one of the two people Panam was close to, Scorpion, unfortunately did not survive. Mitch manages to survive thanks to the help of Panam, but Hellman has already been evacuated by Kang Tao, and now we have to track him down. I'll spare you the details. We track him down at a gas station in another pain-in-the-ass mission because being loud and killing everyone is much more fun than me trying to stealth everyone down, even if it's way harder. After mercilessly killing everyone in this gas station and taking Hellman for myself, we see Panam talking with Saul, leader of the Aldecaldos, bringing her one step closer to reuniting with her family. We take Anders to the hotel out in the Badlands to ask him a couple questions. Anders explains to us that we have an experimental version of the relic. The program was supposed to be designed to allow people to talk with their deceased loved ones again. Secure Your Soul is the name of the program. This version is designed to bring the dead back to life, allowing them to take over a body. Usually not ones with someone still inside them, however. Anders then asks us what it's like to have two personalities in our head, saying that we're both Johnny and ourselves simultaneously, which is honestly not what it feels like. The fact that Johnny often appears in our field of view makes him seem like a separate entity to ourselves, save for the fact that we can communicate with him telepathically. Anders can't help us himself, but he does give us the blueprints, so we have them should we find someone capable of helping us. Going with him to Kang Tao isn't really much of an option either. After we get what we want from him, Takamura shows up to interrogate Hellman himself, at which point we make our exit, ending this portion of the questline.
I don't have particularly strong feelings about this whole questline. I like Panam, I think she's a fun character, but the Aldecaldos don't particularly interest me all that much. It reminds me of the Fast and the Furious franchise with all their talk of family. There's nothing wrong with this message, but it feels very uninspired to me. Most of the Aldecaldos don't really change all that much, aside from Panam and Saul. The only real thing they do is react to Scorpion's death. Mitch has some interesting things to say later on, but I don't know that I'd qualify him as interesting necessarily. I feel like I'm kind of ragging on the Aldecaldos, especially because later I will speak about my thoughts on their ending, and it'll contrast this opinion pretty heavily, I think, but suffice it to say that while I appreciate what they contribute, I'm not really all that interested in them. I mostly speedrun these quests because I liked Panam and I was playing Male V in my first ever playthrough. I will say, they're very important from a narrative standpoint. They offer one of the more thematic outcomes for the story, which is why we'll be revisiting them later. While we aren't required to do any more of their missions for the story, doing the rest of them will be in our best interest to unlock this ending, so let's just, put it aside.
The last questline we need to talk about is Takamura, whose goal is to gather evidence of Yorinobu's wrongdoing and ultimately present it to Hanako so that justice can be served. The first thing he does is try and reach out to Hanako's bodyguard, Sandayu Oda. Oda is not interested in letting us meet Hanako. As soon as we even attempt to explain what happened that night in Konpeki Plaza, he shuts us up. He lets us walk away from this scenario, but he says he will not do so again should our paths cross. At any rate, this gives Takamura the idea that the parade they're putting on to honor Saburo is our best, and more realistically only, chance at getting an audience with Hanako. As such, the next stages of the plan largely become about reconnaissance. First, we need a map of Japantown, which we get from Wakako after Takamura kinda flirts with her. Then we head to the Arasaka warehouse in order to sabotage the float, giving us access to its camera system as well as allowing us to disable the security so that Goro can sneak aboard without triggering any alarms.
Before we execute this plan though, we actually get to have a pretty interesting conversation with him, but I'm going to hold off on talking about it for the time being. I don't enjoy forced stealth missions, and this one comes pretty close, but by this point in the game I was so well equipped that sneaking through anywhere was trivially easy thanks to optic camo and the Sandevistan. Just activate both and cross any gap of your choosing, then wait out the cooldowns.
Anyways, once we escape from the warehouse, it's on to the next step, executing the plan. This is one of my favorite main story missions because while it's predominantly stealth-based, it's not really the end of the world if you get caught. There's typically only 2 or 3 enemies in your line of sight at any given time, so you can just kill them and get back onto sneaking. It's at least a little flexible in that regard. You need to take out the 3 snipers that are guarding the parade so you can eject the Netrunner without immediately being shot down. Problem is, as soon as you attempt to eject the Netrunner, Oda jumps in to intervene. I love this boss fight purely because Oda and I are on equal footing. We both are effectively cyber ninjas frantically moving around the room in a blur. It feels like a real fight you might see in some form of anime or cartoon. The only problem with this fight is that Oda literally vanished mid-fight, so I had to reload and try again. The second time though, it went fine, fucking smoked his ass. Takamura's pleading seems for naught, so instead he kidnaps and drugs Hanako. Listen, I'm not here to judge. We meet Takamura in some random motel where he and Hanako were just hanging out, having tea. Much like Oda, Hanako doesn't seem too convinced by what we have to say. We give her the same spiel we've been giving everyone. Yorinobu murdered his father, he was not poisoned. She does seem to take interest in the fact that we've stolen the relic, however. Not in the sense that she's upset with us for doing so, but more in the way that it lends credibility to our story. It's a pretty specific detail that there's almost no chance we made up, so it's clear we know something we shouldn't. We don't get to hear her thoughts though, because after we go to check who knocked at the door, Arasaka forces sweep in to handle the situation. The floor collapses and we wake up on the bottom level of the motel, tasked with escaping. We actually have the option to save Takamura here, but the game won't tell you this. You have to work your way back up to the room you guys were in by finding this hole in the wall and choosing to go through it. You're not even given a suggestion to do this by being prompted to, quote, check on Takamura. You only learn about this objective halfway up the stairs. I do choose to save Takamura here, and he chastises me for it, but we do manage to make it out alive. He tells us to go our separate ways, where we once again end up in the Sunset Motel, this time with a doll knocking on our door. Turns out this is a proxy for Hanako, who explains that she can sit in denial no longer, that there is truth in our story about Saburo's death. She wants to act quickly, before Yorinobu is able to do any kind of real and lasting damage, strike while the iron is hot, so to speak. We, of course, point out that we need help first, as we can't be of any assistance if we're dead. We request information on Mikoshi, which she rejects, saying we'd need a great deal of knowledge of both the relic and how to use Mikoshi, which conveniently we have. Hanako then instead requests that we meet her at Embers before the proxy departs.
From here, there are a couple things we can choose to take care of, but for the sake of our discussion, we'll talk about them in a minute. The main story, the things we're required specifically to do, are largely completed. There are a couple extra things we can take on to either get different options or achieve different endings, but we can tackle Act 3 now if we're so inclined. I'm going to talk about a couple of the endings in this section, but the process of unlocking them will be something of a discussion for the next section. There are 4 main endings, and most of them converge in the same place. It's just how you get there that's different.
Step 1 is to meet Hanako at Embers. Longtime players will know that stepping into the bar is the game's point of no return. If you choose to continue playing after completing the main story, you'll be brought back right here. This leaves the main story incomplete in any long-running playthrough. Meet Hanako at Embers is kind of the game equivalent of driving around with your check engine light on. Hanako explains to us that the reason she changed her mind wasn't because of our evidence. In truth, everyone kinda already knew his story was a complete lie. It didn't make enough sense, but nobody was willing to rock the boat. The reason she changed her mind was because Yorinobu Arasaka's rescue squad was actually a hit job. She admits that Yorinobu never cared for their family, and now he needs to pay. She basically wants us to attend the next board meeting, explain to everyone what really happened so she can oust him from power once and for all. Of course, this requires our complicity, something Johnny is completely against. The relic starts to malfunction as we're conversing with her, and as we make our way back to the elevator, we completely collapse. This is the worst episode we've had by far. And as it's happening, Johnny explains that while we're teetering on the verge of death, our body is very responsive to him. It's clear he wants us to give him control so he can get us where we need to go. Johnny wants to call Rogue to assault the tower and break into Mikoshi, where we've learned that the access point resides is underneath Arasaka Tower. We can also suggest to him that we want to contact the Aldecaldos, which he tries to shut down. He says we shouldn't bring amateurs, that we tried a similar mission before, and it didn't go well. Of course, he tried with Rogue before, and it didn't go well either. Johnny says we don't want their deaths on our hands, and while I can understand the logic, I'd feel equally bad if Rogue died. There's not much of a clean scenario in this current situation. Believe me, we're going to talk about it in a minute. We black out and wake up in Victor's clinic. Johnny brought us here. Victor explains that we're dying, seriously dying, and we basically need to figure out what we're going to do now. This is the point at which we choose our path for the end of the game. The game features 4 major endings, and there's a little overlap between them. Our objective is to enter Mikoshi, and there are several ways of doing that, but it's kind of an all roads lead to Rome situation.
When I first played through this, sitting here with Johnny contemplating what to do, I very accurately clocked that somebody would die no matter what we did, and because of that, I didn't want to call on anyone for help. The only apparent path that did not involve the help of your friends was siding with Hanako. So, as a result, I chose to side with her, not because I respected her, but because I didn't want my friends to bear the consequences of my actions. Let me tell you, the game did not interpret my actions that way. You get immediately vilified by Misty, who does a tarot reading for you as you wait for whoever you called, basically outlining the end of the game for you. I felt bad because I wasn't allowed to justify myself. I couldn't explain that I didn't want to side with Arasaka, but I didn't want anyone to die for me either. I disliked this ending so much that as soon as I completed it, I reloaded and chose again, this time choosing to side with Johnny and asking Rogue for help instead. This results in an ending that I was much happier with. What I didn't know at the time was that there was in fact a way to get through the tower solo without calling on Hanako. But the steps to get to it are very obscure and not something I would have ever figured out without help from the internet. I refused to look through the community during my first playthrough, something we already talked about, so I was completely on my own exploring the game at this point. In order to access this secret ending, you have to say a specific dialogue option during Johnny's funeral, and then during this rooftop scene, you have to sit here in silence until Johnny suggests a new plan, which, by the way, takes 5 minutes. The fact that this ending has such an obscure hoop to jump through still rubs me wrong to this day. I don't want to go over all the endings in detail. I would like viewers of this video to experience some part of the game for themselves, but I think there are 2 specific endings I want to go over. I think these are the most important ones for the narrative. One of them is purely based on the path I chose for this playthrough, and the other is what I would consider the best ending for the narrative as a whole.
First, let's look at the star. We need to team up with the Aldecaldos here against Johnny's wishes. We call up Pan Am and she and Saul devise a plan to get us into Mikoshi. That plan? Big old drill. Listen, it's not the worst idea I've ever heard. Before that, we first get brought into the family in earnest. We get a jacket and are formally made an Aldecaldo. Now, Saul's motives here are not purely in the interest of helping us out. During a scene with Mitch, he talks about Saul's plan. He believes he can gain something from Mikoshi, tech that will help them when it's time to leave Night City. He gets all the credit if they succeed, and Pan Am will take all the blame if they fail because she's the one who brought us on and insisted on this plan. Even now, the Aldecaldos are a clusterfuck, which, in fairness, we were warned about. Pan Am echoes her own concerns about leading everyone on this incredibly dangerous mission. Her nerves about the fact that Saul is just seemingly agreeing with everything she says. Unfortunately, there's no turning back now. The plan is in motion. From here, it's a pretty standard 2077 quest. The plan is to raise hell until we get where we need to go. We break into the dig site, kill everyone, fire up the drill, make it to Arasaka HQ, then kill everyone here too. When we finally make it into the depths of the tower, we have a chance to connect Alt to the network, which instantly trivializes the whole ordeal. We get to see just how powerful the AI version of her really is, killing everything in our path. There is still one last obstacle in our way. Atom fucking Smasher. If you choose to come here with other people, say Rogue or Pan Am and Saul, Smasher will inevitably kill one of them before the boss fight even starts. In this scene, he kills Saul by crushing his skull. The fight against Smasher is hard, but it's not impossible. He's definitely not fucking around, though. Much like me, he's sporting a Sandevistan, and the interesting thing is that it uses the same design aesthetic as the version from Edgerunners. Another reason I'm sad we don't get to talk about this show. You can opt not to kill Smasher after you defeat him, but why on earth would you do that? With that, our path to Mikoshi is clear. Hooking up to the access point causes us to wake up in cyberspace. Depending on your choices in Act 1, you can actually encounter Jackie here. He doesn't have much to say, he mostly just repeats dialogue from Act 1. He doesn't even seem to recognize us, much less understand where he is. We reconvene with Johnny here in Mikoshi, who explains that the process to fix us has already started. Alt fired Soul Killer on us the moment we got here. The plan was to soul kill us, untangle our constructs, and then inject V back into their body. The problem is that V's immune system now sees them as an intruder. The body officially belongs to Johnny, not them. The choice here is incredibly clear. Do we give up our body and go with Alt beyond the Black Wall, or do we take our body and live with whatever time we have, hoping we can find a solution down the road? That somehow Alt overlooked something else. We'll talk about both these endings in due time, but for now I'm choosing to take my body back, completing the star ending that I started. In this ending we choose to go with the Aldecaldos as they leave Night City. Notably, if you romanced Panam or Judy in this scenario, they will accompany you out of the city. Carrie and River choose to stay here.
River stays because he refuses to abandon his family, and Carrie refuses because why would he leave the city? It works for him. He's rich enough to live comfortably. I don't want to discredit Carrie, because as we'll come to learn later, he is the realest motherfucker in this game.
We have to sneak out of the city in order to finally be rid of it, and the game ends with you and Panam sitting atop the basilisk, looking out at the night sky, an endless horizon ahead of you.
This part of the ending works a lot better if you romanced Panam, but it's still nice even if you haven't. It should be Judy, though. This is the best ending for Judy, I think, at least from a character romance perspective. Choosing to stay in Night City by completing the Sun ending will only cause her to leave during the final mission, same with Panam. At least this way the two of you stand a real chance of happiness free from the city. Of course, it's not unlikely that you die in the coming months, which would mean that she followed you out only to watch you die. If you follow that line of thinking, then the best ending for her is to simply choose to leave after you complete her last mission instead of romancing her. I think this part comes down to personal preference and what you want the narrative to mean, as there's not really a direct way to disprove any of it. The other ending I want to talk about is Temperance. This one functions largely the same way. Step 1, get to Mikoshi.
This time I opted to use the secret ending to just go apeshit at Arasaka HQ. Actually, I have a bone to pick with this ending. Again. This ending has the fun caveat that when you die, the credits roll and you just basically get a game over. While this is an interesting design choice, very frustrating from a gameplay perspective, because it means that if you want to try again, the game doesn't load their critical failure screen. The game tries to get you to play the credits and you have to opt to go back to the main menu and then load the save where you enter the tower. You can't save after entering the tower either, so dying means you start from this point. Additionally, you have to deal with the relic killing you over the course of the whole mission. Every time the relic malfunctions, your maximum health goes down. I don't know if it has a cap. I certainly didn't find it. All these factors meant that for the sake of time, I had to turn down the difficulty to hard mode to clear this efficiently. Anyways, we're back in Mikoshi, same song and dance. If we chose to go back at this point, we'd get the Sun ending. But instead, I want to let Johnny opt to keep our body. Johnny tries to fight back, arguing that we're giving up, that we're turning and running. But I think the truth of it is, he doesn't believe that he deserves it, that he's afraid, not just for us, but for himself. The remainder of the ending plays out from Johnny's perspective. We never get to see what the other side looks like. There's something chilling about that. Something poetic about the other side that we never get to see. Johnny has to run a few errands with a boy named Steve. He stops for a guitar and rents via space at the columbarium, placing the bullet necklace inside, saying he can't carry it anymore. Johnny is trying to abandon V's life completely in favor of starting over, in favor of leaving the city. I like this ending, but There's the fact that Johnny has denied everyone in V's life closure. The call from Judy in the credits is so incredibly sad because of that fact. She just wants to know where she went wrong.
There is no perfect ending in this game, but I think this is one that feels the most narratively satisfying, in spite of Johnny's avoidance. For the most part, all of these endings are satisfying in their own way, but there's always some catch to them. There's no perfect ending in Night City.
As is the case with any kind of open-world RPG, this game is full of different characters for us to interact with. In the main story, there are a number of mission lines that center around a couple of the more important people we'll encounter in Night City. We'll start this section by talking about the game's romance. There are 4 main romanceable characters in this game, 2 male, 2 female, and 1 for each sexual orientation.
Unlike other RPGs, the gender of your character, as well as your voice, impacts the attraction of these main NPCs towards you, at least romantically. You can still become their friend and, more importantly, take on their missions, no matter what. But if you want to romance Panam, your V has to be male. This is a pretty uncommon thing in RPGs, at least the ones I've experienced. My best guess as to the reason why is that it restricts player freedom in the way that they would have no understanding of coming into the game, and many of these games pride themselves on freedom of choice. Most of the time, your character's gender is completely irrelevant. You're just a vessel to make choices. Nobody really regards you as anything. I'm not criticizing this in terms of game design, as I do think it has a place in RPGs, but I like that it's absent here, because real people aren't like that, at least not ubiquitously. I mean, yes, people are bisexual or pansexual, but I think it's safe to say that the majority of people are not. It's an incredibly minor difference, but it makes a world of change and immediately gives all of these characters something that makes them feel more human. And you don't even have to be a good writer to do something like this.
Now, this has been a long-winded exercise in explaining that Judy's a lesbian, and that is in fact why I chose to play as female V, but I felt it worth explaining because of how uncommon it is, at least in games where you play a highly customizable character. Each of these characters also has a series of side quests where you'll get to know them better while also working to help them solve some kind of problem using your skills as a mercenary. Most of these quests come just from playing through the main game, namely Judy and Panam, but you have to interact with in order to complete the main story. The 2 others are a little different. River's missions come to you from a side quest given to you by the Peraleses, and start after you complete the first mission for them. And romancing Carrie only comes about during the tail end of the game, when you're helping Johnny try and reconnect with the people in his life.
For the most part, I like all of these. They have a pretty natural progression to the romance within them, but there's something that I perceive as a problem. So while, yes, these characters do have their own personal preferences, there are still several of these character interactions that don't change, regardless of your gender, and do come across as somewhat flirty, at least to me.
Panam is the biggest offender of this. You get pretty close for 2 people who are just friends in that shack, but when push comes to shove, she's not interested, try as I might. Now, there is an elephant in this room that I have yet to address, and that's River. Fans of the game will know immediately where I'm going with this, and for those of you who don't, well, I'm sorry you won't get to experience this for yourself.
River's romance is painfully awkward. It both feels like it comes out of nowhere, and trying to reject him only makes it that much more difficult. I actually just skipped it in my playthrough for this recording because I just didn't want to deal with that dinner scene. The scene entails you having dinner at his home when one of the characters, I forget who, says that the 2 of us should be a couple, and if we agree, we should raise our hands. If you decline to raise your hand, it just leaves this massive tension so thick, I think you'd need a chainsaw to cut through it. It's easily the weakest romance in the game, and what's more amusing is apparently the devs didn't see it as so awkward. I've actually seen it compared to the experience of being a girl, because just being nice to River and trying to help him will ultimately end in this incredibly uncomfortable dinner unless you're mean, which is both hilarious and accurate.
Now, I've never actually romanced Carrie or River, the former because I usually pick female V for Judy, and the latter because I don't want to. At any rate, for the sake of our discussion, I think it matters little. The important thing here is that once you do, these characters continue to chat with you via text. In one of the more recent updates, you can also invite them to your house on a date, which is pretty neat.
Night City is something of a satire of our modern world. I don't really feel this needs explaining, that's the point of the genre, but because this world is home to a host of characters who are completely insane and deranged, a byproduct of the corrupting force of the city, you either learn to deal with it, or it consumes you. We see this the most in the various gangs that control the city, each one vying for control over a specific section, determined to take everyone down with them. Yet, taking a look at the story closer, we see that the most vile characters are much more rooted in reality. The main antagonistic force of the game is Arasaka, as it's Subaru's drive for immortality that places us where we are now.
It's them who Johnny is protesting against, launching his attacks against, and I mean, it's easy to see why. I don't think I need to explain why corporations are evil. This part isn't even satire, it's just true. Arasaka's desire for power and control pervades everything we see and do. The way that there has been not one, not two, but 4 corporate wars in the universe of Cyberpunk should make this apparent.
We get a taste of Arasaka politics both in our role as a corpo and also in choosing the devil ending. Even our companions are pretty normal individuals, at least compared to the randomly generated NPCs we see on the streets. Many of these characters have very out there outfits and modifications, but we don't really see a lot of that in the main cast of characters we're talking about now. Honestly, the weirdest thing any of them really has is River's eye, and that's pretty tame considering some of the crazy shit you can see. I think if anything, the game plays it pretty safe with a lot of the chrome aspects of characters, especially the player. My aspirations to become Atom Smasher are crushed at every turn.
Each of these companions fits into one of 2 categories. Panam and Judy both want to leave Night City. The place has little left to offer them at this point. In fact, Judy leaves the city early if you don't romance her. She only agrees to stick it out because she has feelings for you. River and Carrie have deeper ties to the city, though. I say River and Carrie, really I just mean River. River's family lives here, so it makes sense that he doesn't want to leave if he can't take them with him. As for Carrie, I mean, the system effectively worked for him. Carrie's a rich man, so he has no incentive to leave the city. He has the power to make it work for him.
I know people really liked the Sun ending, which is cool, but I think above all else, the game teaches us that you can't really beat Night City at its game. Even if you become a legend, you're still doing the same shit you always were, just on a bigger scale now. Tasked with taking on the Crystal Palace is a big accomplishment, but we're given this mission by people even more powerful than we are. It's the same thing, just one rung higher up on the ladder. This man, Mr. Blue Eyes, actually comes up again if you're vigilant. Now, I'm not saying you can't end up happy in Night City. If anything, I'm saying you can end up in Night City being happy, in spite of being here.
Before we talk about Johnny, there's one person I'd feel remiss if I didn't mention. Goro Takamura is one of my favorite characters in the game, and he occupies a very interesting niche as something of a foil to our character, and the lifestyle we choose to live. Takamura was the bodyguard tasked with protecting the Emperor, and he spends the game trying to prove that he was murdered by his son. As we team up with him to collect evidence and move closer to Hanako in order to convince her of his wrongdoing, we get a lot of chances to talk to him about his past and his loyalty to Arasaka. It's no mystery about the terrible things that Arasaka has done, we literally just talked about them, but all the same, they did effectively save Takamura from poverty. It's time to pull out one of those pens that I've been saving for later. Takamura tells us about living in the slums until he was presented with the opportunity to rise above it and escape all that. He is a success story from the whole thing, at least in theory. Of course, the thing that gets him out of his position in life is total obedience and loyalty to Arasaka and the Emperor, serving as an armed double act without question or hesitation, something that Takamura effectively rejects if you try and bring this up to him. Still, it's an interesting point that the game brings up, that we can like and respect Takamura because there is at least some mutual understanding between us. He's the one person from Arasaka we get to know on a personal level, the one we get a chance to connect with. Unfortunately, Takamura is still an agent of Arasaka at his core. He doesn't really seem to understand our position, and actively hates us if we do anything but side with Arasaka in the devil ending. And even in that ending, Goro wants you to sign yourself away to the Secure Your Soul program. The very thing that put you in this position. I think it's time we talk about Johnny in earnest. As the guy we spend most of the game with, Johnny has plenty of time to spout his opinions at us. In fact, there are a number of points in the game where we're forced to sit down and have a chat with Johnny, usually after a particularly strong episode of the relic malfunctioning. Johnny is an extremist through and through, there's no mistaking that, but I think his reasoning is sound, even if you want to argue with the conclusions he draws from it. His story about corporations stripping the resources of places only to leave the people who inhabit that place worse off than they started, with no hope of recourse, is a powerful idea, in part because of how rooted in reality it is. This is a thing that we experience in our real world. Companies like Nestle gave out free samples of baby formula to impoverished areas, only for the women there to become unable to produce breast milk.
Nestle as a whole is a company we could draw parallels from all day, but instead I'll just leave it with the then CEO Peter Brabeck-Lemov saying that water is not a right.
The idea that something needs to be done about not just Arasaka, but all corporations is borderline just a statement of fact. And yet, what is there to do?
The right way to do activism or rebellion is another argument I don't really care to litigate, as the morals and ethics of such a thing are far too complex for me to tackle in the scope of this video, but suffice it to say, Johnny's plan fails. Bombing Arasaka Tower did little, if anything, to eradicate them or even make them see the error of their ways. The tower looks almost exactly the same as it did 50 years ago, a horrible phoenix risen from the ashes. The worst part in all this is they seem no worse for wear either. Their foothold in Night City is as present and strong as it's ever been, their logo plastered all over the city. The kicker in all this? The bomb was given to the team by Militech.
Johnny starts off by being actively hostile towards us. Waking up over 50 years after your death in the mind of someone else would probably do that to you. He's not even in the driver's seat at first. We're still in control of our body when he's encouraging us to kill ourselves so he can take over. The only reason he stops is because we force him to, taking Misty's Omega blockers to shut him out of our mind for the time being. He then almost immediately apologizes to you for the whole thing and vows to help you out instead.
This has always rubbed me the wrong way, mostly because of how quickly it happens. I'm of two minds on the subject. On one hand, it's clear that Johnny has some kind of plan that likely doesn't involve his own death again, and on the other hand, being cunning and patient is not his strong suit. It's entirely antithetical to his character, something we witnessed literally moments before this diner scene. I've struggled in this section to coalesce my thoughts into a concrete statement, so I'm just going to ramble them at you in the hopes that you start to understand where I'm coming from in this whole thing. I've always had a little trouble with the way the game wants us to treat Johnny. After completing each of the game's main branches, your relic malfunctions and you end up having some pretty heavy conversations with him. In most of these, he's pretty honest with us about his goals and motives.
In each of them, the game presents us with an option to effectively shut him down, tell him that we're not working together or that we don't trust him. In the beginning, this makes sense, because what reason do we have to do so? My main issue comes when we sit with Johnny at his grave. The way to unlock the secret ending, the way to max out your friendship with Johnny, is to tell him that he fucked up his chances with us as well as all those he cared about from 2023. The thing is, I don't really know that Johnny's done much of anything to fuck up his chances with us.
I feel like there must be something I'm not seeing. I must be looking at it the wrong way. Given how many times the game brings this up, I'm surely just not failing to see the forest for the trees on this one, am I? I have over 500 hours in this game, but I still feel like this kind of comes out of nowhere. I'm afraid that when I post this, people will point out in the comments all the things I was missing. But I guess if I can get to this point in the game multiple times and still feel like Johnny hasn't really broken our trust, is the fault with me? I don't know. Genuinely, I don't know.
After you complete the main mission objectives, all 3 main story paths, you black out and Johnny takes you to a hotel in Pacifica. He brings us here to show us the dog tags of someone who sacrificed himself for Johnny during the Mexican conflict. This is a larger point about how Johnny intends to do the same for us. He has no intention of returning to this world. He says that when the time comes, he'll agree to get wiped. This mission puts Johnny on the redemption arc in earnest. We spend a good chunk of time going back to the people in his life who are still alive and trying to reconnect with them in order to leave a better perception of him when he's gone. Johnny's only other request is that we kill Adam Smasher. Pretty reasonable, and I already wanted to do it anyways. It's during this redemption arc that we gain the ability to unlock the secret ending, as it's when we visit Johnny's grave.
Based on the context, it seemed like the fact that Johnny has come to terms with his newfound mortality has driven him to go out on better terms than he did last time. He's confronted his death in a way that our character hasn't quite done yet, and depending on the ending you choose, may never really do. This is why I like the Temperance ending from the perspective of V and Johnny. I think it's the ending that pays off this arc in the most satisfying way. Our character is forced to come to terms with their mortality, and rather than choose to be selfish, we agree to go with Alt, and give Johnny a real chance to be a better person than he used to be. This is slightly undercut by the fact that Johnny does not explain why V's body has effectively vanished from everyone's lives, but I think there is something of an argument to be made here about the fact that he grew to care for V, and has a hard time reconciling the fact that they're gone. Not only that, but they sacrificed themselves for him. To me, that's why he puts the bullet necklace in the columbarium. Why he says he can't hold on to it anymore. This is also one of the endings where V leaves Night City. Speaking of,
the entirety of the game takes place in the singular location of Night City. The game doesn't even do the typical thing where open world games have a DLC that takes place in another area of the world. You will spend the entirety of the game exploring the city itself.
the idea that you can't leave this place is a pretty important component of the story, as multiple endings actually involve you leaving the city. Because this is the only place we'll know, it's important that we actually get the impression that Night City is a lived-in place, as opposed to just something that's a simulacrum of a city.
Technology, real-world technology, actually plays an important factor in this. Populating the city with bodies is one of the most important details when it comes to building something like this. There would be an incredibly liminal feeling of walking through a space as large as this and seeing few, if any, people.
When I think about these kinds of sparse cities, I think of Skyrim, where all the holds in that game are much smaller than I would have expected them to be.
I think the most common thing I experienced is that sometimes when you're driving a car, NPCs won't appear until you slow down. I don't know how much of it is that my computer's just not able to keep up with the game, but for the sake of this discussion, it doesn't matter. This video is less about being a review of the game and more an analysis of its world building and themes. I came into it with a pretty concrete perception of the game, and it wasn't really one I wanted to challenge. I like the game in spite of its flaws, and I wanted to talk about what works and why I like it. Sorry to anybody who wanted an abject review, but you've clearly not paid attention to my channel before. Exploring Night City is probably my favorite aspect of the game. I have a bad habit of just fucking off as soon as I'm given unrestricted control over my character, and that is exactly what happened when I played this game for the sake of recording. It also happened, albeit to a lesser extent, when I played through it the first time too. Night City is a mile wide. Not literally. Even so, being stuck in Watson, it's easy to run around and stumble into something to do. NCPD Hustler missions are everywhere, and the perfect excuse to run around going apeshit on everyone, my favorite pastime in this game. Each of these missions functions exactly the same. You find a group of criminals, kill them all, secure the evidence. That's all there is to it. They're about as repetitive as it comes. The enjoyment I get from them stems less from the fact that they're interesting, and more from the fact that I think the game's mechanics are really fun, and this is the best way to do that, just dashing around slicing people in half.
The other style of what I'm going to call world filler quests are the gigs that are appointed to you by fixers. It doesn't really matter which fixer we're talking about, all these gigs follow the same formula. There are a couple different styles of gig, but they don't vary from fixer to fixer, they're simply tied to whichever fixer operates out of a given location. These quests definitely come across to me as filler, things that make the world have more in it. And I think that you can understand this functionality without necessarily being critical of it.
Part of the reason the game gets a pass here is because of the setting. A city, by its very nature, is filled with people who live their lives and operate independently of us as the player. Night City is also a caricature of society. It is incredibly violent and dystopian. Crime is rampant and ever-present, so it makes sense that we stumble upon so much of it that requires our attention. I mean, the NCPD will abandon searching for us after a comically short amount of time. They're stretched pretty thin, especially with how many of them we kill.
These little things do fill up the space with something for us to interact with, but they also set the tone for the kind of world we live in, the kind of place that Night City is. As we do more and more of these missions, it teaches us just how toxic the city is, how few resources it has to make any meaningful changes. And that itself is predicated on the idea that the city wants to make changes, which we also learn over the course of the game is simply not true.
We learn that the NCPD is a tool, the same as anything else. We see examples of corruption primarily in covering up the death of the former mayor, Lucius Rhine. Building a city to scale is unfortunately not technology we have at the present, but I think Night City does a really good impression of one. I never felt like the city was too small or didn't contain enough to do. I've never completed all the side content a game has to offer, but I have come pretty close here.
There are two major things I have that could be construed as criticisms, but are not inherently so. The first is that the game gets very close to doing the whole urban hell but it's Japan kind of thing that I don't like. I'll admit that I have something of a soft spot when it comes to metropolitan areas in real life. The whole thing is a layered discussion for me, in part because I don't entirely think that that's what the game is trying to do. Bright Metropolitan City is the aesthetic of choice not just because it's cool looking, but rather because it gives the city a deception of beautiful lies.
Its goal is to lure you in with empty promises, keeping people trapped, chasing a dream you'll never quite catch. And damn is Night City beautiful. Were it that the city looked cool and being here was portrayed as a good thing, I might have a bigger issue with its portrayal. But the game spends a good chunk of its runtime beating us over the head with the very opposite of this idea.
My other slight nitpick is that we never get to leave Night City. And when I say that, I know we can't literally leave Night City. That's what the previous section was about. I just wish that the DLC had given us a totally new area to explore. I had assumed that the DLC for this game would follow the same pattern as it had for The Witcher 3, and unfortunately that just wasn't the case. We only ever got the one DLC for this game, which did technically expand the map by adding the Dogtown area, which is good, and we will talk about it, don't worry. Like I said, this is more of a nitpick than anything, but it did kinda let me down. I think part of that stemmed from the fact that we weren't getting a second DLC for the game that I was heavily invested in at all. Now we have to wait for the release of the next Cyberpunk game instead, so strap in, we're gonna be here a while.
I seriously don't think I can state just how beautiful I think this place is. There's such a big variety in areas of this place. I talked about a beautiful lie, and nowhere is this more apparent than standing in the city center, a monument to corporations and the people who work for them. Standing here and never moving could almost convince you that this is a nice place to be. This is the section that can afford to be clean. One of the best contrasting shots is standing out in the Badlands and looking up at the scrolling light billboards. It really puts the contrast of the city on full display, really makes you understand why people can't or won't leave this place. The city's a nightmare, sure, but there's something about it. Out in the Badlands, there's nothing. How the Aldecaldos live out here is beyond me. It's a totally arid desert. If there ever were resources here, I suspect they've been gone a long time. When I played through the game for the first time, I refused to use the fast travel points to get around. Instead, I opted to drive everywhere, and I think the game was better for it as a result. It really let me get accustomed to navigating around the city.
I never knew the place by hand, but given how many different areas and roads there are, I think that's more than fair. Living in New York wouldn't make you know all the streets and routes there either, but it does give you a much better understanding of where you're going and how to get there. I still try to stick to this rule even in subsequent playthroughs, and I'm not usually the kind of person who feels compelled to do an immersive amount of role-playing in these kinds of games. I'm the kind of person who will in fact look stuff up in order to build more optimal characters. I tend to treat these games less as experiences and more as games. But something about Cyberpunk compelled me to do the opposite, to really get myself immersed in the world. I really tried to put myself in the shoes of V. And when a game can make me reach that level of investment, I think that's a sign that I'll have a lot of fun playing through it.
Exploring Night City is probably my favorite part of the base game, but the reason I get so much enjoyment out of it is because of how good the mechanics are in this game. In this specific instance, I'm mostly talking about movement. The build I ended up going for with this playthrough was predominantly a melee variant with a big emphasis on the movement-related abilities. I love getting access to the air dash powers as well as the ability to double jump. Putting all of the movement abilities together gives you the power to perform some crazy shit. I had to actively try and walk around like a normal person to get less chaotic footage for this essay, and even then I would still argue that I largely failed. I haven't actually tried every build that you can do in this game, especially with the 2.0 update overhauling the entire skill tree, but the ones I have played through have always felt incredibly satisfying. The gunplay in this game has been something I enjoyed since day one. One of my favorite pastimes in this game is just driving around and taking on all the NCPD hustler missions. It's the easiest way to just test out new gear or simply fuck around and kill people without having to deal with MaxTac trying to retaliate for you hitting a cop after they run you over.
I honestly wish that I had experienced more of the different builds this game has to offer. In working on this video, I was recommended tons of Cyberpunk content, including YouTube shorts of people just performing the craziest stunts and getting the most insane kills on targets. It actually almost convinced me to pivot to a throwable weapon build, but wielding a katana like a psycho was just too appealing.
So let's actually talk about some of these mechanics, starting with cyberware. Like most things, this has something of an overhaul in the 2.0 update, but I would say it's pretty largely remained the same. You have a finite amount of space for cyberware augmentations. The cyberware screen shows us that we have 1 eye slot, 2 hand slots, 1 leg slot, 3 skin slots. You get the idea. No matter how many cyberware points we have, we're hard limited by this system. There's also the secondary system of capacity we have to contend with. Each piece of tech has a point value, and your point value total can't exceed your cyberware capacity. It's a pretty complicated system, I know. There's a whole section of the tech tree devoted to absolutely just chroming yourself out, which I did eventually get to later on in this playthrough.
In past versions of the game, your article of clothing also had different abilities and stats instead of just being cosmetic like they are now. Therefore, it used to be imperative to find certain articles of clothing in order to optimize the build you were going for. It was also a huge pain in the ass for customization because you were often wearing some goofy shit that you didn't like just because it did something you wanted it to. The game technically had sets of gear, but unless you went out of your way to track them down, you probably didn't have any. There was an override in the form of outfits where sometimes the game would basically just say cover it up slut and make you wear whatever was necessary for the moment. The whole thing was a relic taken from The Witcher 3, and that's a system that works fine there because one of the game's components is all about locating old sets of Witcher gear, either crafting them or finding them outright in treasure hunts. These were specific quests, and while you still couldn't mask their appearance, you at least got to wear something cohesive. This system ultimately got changed to what we have now, where clothes have very few specific benefits, you can customize the entire outfit, and nobody really sells specific styles of clothes anymore.
To bring this whole thing full circle, the point of this tangent was that in previous versions of the game, your cyberware mattered less because you could find clothing items to give you specific bonuses for your build instead, somewhat offsetting the needs to just become 2/3 robot. I know that after the 2.0 update, I invested a lot heavier into cyberware, if for no other reason than all clothes did not provide you with armor anymore, and the easiest way to defend yourself was with subdermal armor. I mean, you can see just how much shit I ended up with by the end of the game.
This actually brings me to my next point, which is no matter how much shit you deck yourself out with, you always just kinda look like a person.
The Maelstrom faction is interesting both visually and story-wise because of how much they have augmented themselves with cyberware. They're often defined by their red spider-like eyes as well as heavily modulated voices. People like them, as well as Adam Smasher, show just how far down the rabbit hole you can go, trading your humanity for power, or in the case of Lizzie Wizzy, fame.
The only real augmentations that heavily alter your appearance come in the form of arm modifications. You get a different number of arm mods that will pretty radically alter the way you look. The most striking though is definitely mantis blades, which basically turn your arms into hidden compartments for 2 swords. Even in the concealed form you can tell just how much your body has been altered to accommodate this, and it actually swings almost into body horror to actually wield them in combat, made all the more disturbing by just how little the game actually acknowledges this fact. Unfortunately, this is essentially the end of the line when it comes to visual modifications. It doesn't really matter how much other stuff you add to yourself, how much of your humanity you trade away. You don't really change all that much, visually or even mechanically.
Cyberpsychosis is a thing we encounter a lot throughout the game. Even if you choose not to take on these missions, every time you get near one you'll get a call from Regina, so you're pretty much forced to interact with it.
I want to once again briefly revisit Cyberpunk Edgerunners for a moment here. CD Projekt Red is involved with the creation of the game to a degree, as the sound design for the game can be heard in every single episode. And there are actually a couple of added quests into the game that reference the characters from the show. The show itself deals pretty heavily with the idea of cyberpsychosis through its main character, and this allows us to witness it firsthand, something that we wouldn't really get to see otherwise. You can load yourself up with a Sandevistan just like David, as well as 400 other things, but it doesn't matter, it'll never drive you insane. This is both true from a gameplay standpoint as well as a lore standpoint. I understand why it works this way, but for a game about losing your identity and becoming something else and not being able to do anything about it, I'm shocked that we don't get more examples of this.
There's one other major thing I want to talk about in this section. Of course, guns are a core component of this first-person shooter, who could have seen that coming, but the game also features one other major method of combat.
Quick hacking is the other major build that I've played, both pre and post the 2.0 update, though it's been so long now since the original release that I only vaguely remember the mechanics as they existed before. One of your cyberware slots is primarily dedicated to your cyber deck, though you can replace it with something like a Sandevistan, which is what I did. Basically, you have a specified amount of RAM which can be used on different quick hacks. Which quick hacks you have access to depends on which ones you have equipped. There's a finite amount of space in your cyber deck. Some demons, as the game refers to them, are stealth-oriented, such as rebooting your enemy's vision or the ones that cause a distraction, while others are decidedly weapons like contagion and synaptic burnout. This actually gives you a pretty decent variety of how you want to use quick hacks to take on situations, allowing you to create something of a stealth build. Of course, I find it more fun to just hit everyone with contagion and then watch them play hide and seek with you. The challenge in quick hack builds comes not in the form of your ability to aim, as time slows down when you attempt a quick hack, so you're not in any danger of being shot, but instead in managing your resources, as the speed at which your RAM recharges is dependent on both your skills as well as the cyberdeck you are currently operating off of. Once you run out of RAM, it can largely be a waiting game in order for it to recharge, which may not always work out in your favor. Combat becomes something of a different beast for you, and I think it's different enough that it provides a substantial change to the gameplay loop in ways that something like a melee build over a shooter build does not. I keep bringing up the 2.0 update, so let's talk about it.
On September 21st, 2023, CDPR dropped the biggest update for the game to date, titled as the Cyberpunk 2.0 update. Within it was a massive list of changes, and I do mean massive. Basically, every facet of the game was updated in one form or another. The website has a list of changes made, but even they admit that it's not a complete list, and to go through them all would be too many to list.
Some of these things we've talked about before, like clothes being mostly cosmetic now, and an increased reliance on cyberware for your armor. Many things were also rebalanced, such as boss fights and the RAM usage of various quick hacks. The original version of being a netrunner felt insanely strong, and I think the major reason I haven't been as keen on picking it up anymore is just because the major thing they did was increase the RAM usage of most of the quick hacks. They also removed my favorite perk, which was the one that let one quick hack spread from one person to another. Nothing felt as powerful as just shutting a man down Windows XP style and then watching his buddy drop dead in turn as well. Another major difficulty tweak was made to health items. Health items had previously been both craftable and lootable from containers around the world. This meant that you likely had a metric fuckton of them stashed away, and it was trivially easy to just absolutely inhale them to power through an encounter. Yeah, you can't do that anymore. You get 2. This whole update largely made the game more difficult, especially if you were a netrunner. Deleting a man from existence is still very satisfying though, so I'm willing to give it a pass.
Among the 2.0 changes that I really liked were the changes made to crafting. Crafting was a massive pain that yielded almost no experience, and in order to craft the max rarity stuff you had to invest skill points into it, which took an immense amount of crafting. It just wasn't really worth it to me.
I remember when the update happened, I was somewhat annoyed that they changed all the shit I had grown accustomed to. Sure, everything got refunded, but the whole thing was a process of relearning what everything did, and trying to work that out for myself bothered me at first, but in a way it was kind of like more game to play. I do sometimes wish I could go back and experience the 1.0 version of the game, but truthfully, I don't think it'd really be all that different gameplay-wise. I mean, the game would still be a complete mess. While exploring Night City is something that gives me an immense level of enjoyment, the thing that I think gets me to come back to this game time and time again is the mechanics. The gameplay is very satisfying, but nothing beats going apeshit with a melee build, as you can see from all the footage I have of this game. The movement is incredibly fluid and satisfying, and once I moved the game to an SSD, because that's been a requirement since 2.0 and my dumbass didn't realize it, the world loads properly now to accommodate for the increased movement.
The world not only looks great, but has a lot of functionality to help it feel alive. You can sit down and ride the transit system around the city, which is such an amazing detail that I forgot about until coming back to do this analysis. It has different lines that head to the various districts around the city in both directions. The NPCs that populate the city have also come a long way from the way they were in Cyberpunk 1.0. They now have varied reactions to you committing crimes, and can even start gang wars with one another, as also noted by the 2.0 patch notes.
I feel like there's a trend when it comes to DLC in AAA video games. CD Projekt Red definitely falls into this category, but they're also not alone. Another game that I'm a big fan of is Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I'm not going to uncork the bottle that is that franchise, but as an open world RPG, I think it's a fun game with a fantastic setting. The trend I feel I've noticed is one slightly smaller DLC that takes place within the existing world map, sometimes expanding on certain areas, and a second, larger DLC that adds an entirely new location to the game with a new map. CDPR's other massive hit, The Witcher 3, falls squarely into this camp with its pair of DLCs, Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine.
Both of these are pretty good, but god damn do I love Blood and Wine. It is without a doubt my favorite part of one of my favorite games, and it kills me that we're not going to talk about it.
Anyways, when Cyberpunk 2077 released, the game seemed like it would follow the same pattern. 2 DLCs that would be released, one small, one big. That was what they had said originally. Now, we didn't have an exact timeline, but going off the dev's previous schedule, The Witcher released on May 19th and Hearts of Stone came out October 13th of the same year, giving us a time period of about 5 months. Well, May came and went, and there was no news of the DLC. May became June, became July, and eventually 1 year had passed, which was about the time Blood and Wine had released for The Witcher 3. It would take almost another year before we'd hear about the upcoming DLC for 2077. On September 6th, 2022, we finally had a release date for the newly revealed Phantom Liberty DLC. September of 2023. The other notable thing was that we would no longer be getting a second DLC, as the studio was winding down their work on the game to gear up for The Witcher 4, as well as a sequel to 2077. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little disappointed by all this, not just because it was gonna take us nearly 3 years to get the DLC for this game, but because the idea I had built up in my head wouldn't come to fruition. In spite of that, I was still excited. I had already played through the game 3 or 4 times. I was excited to explore a new area of Night City. I've been trying to avoid going through the story beat by beat in this video, but I think that if I'm going to structure my thoughts on Phantom Liberty correctly, we're just going to have to go through the whole thing in order. I tried to avoid it as long as I could. I'm sorry.
We can't access the DLC right off the bat, unless you select it when you start up a new save file, but we're here to play the whole game, so we don't get access to it until you complete the main missions in Pacifica, culminating with meeting Alt beyond the Black Wall, then fucking up the Voodoo Boys. Fuck you, Placide. I know the Netwatch guy is also a piece of shit, but you all are worse. As soon as you leave the church to complete the mission, someone named Songbird contacts you. Calls is definitely not the right word. They don't ring you on the phone, they kind of hack their way into your mind, like someone else we know. Offering us a solution to our predicament, they ask us to go to the entrance to Dogtown, a new area in Pacifica that was previously just a big fenced-in chunk we couldn't access. We can already tell that there's something strange about Songbird, but it's quickly about to get worse. Heading to the Dogtown gate, we realize that they're not big on letting new people inside, given the high level of security that's out here. We also get introduced to a new faction in the gang wars of Night City, the Barghests, another nod to the Witcher franchise.
Barghests are dog-like spirits in the world of The Witcher, but they do have their roots in real-world folklore, being a monstrous black dog in English folklore. Given what the logo for the Barghest looks like in this game, it seems pretty clear to me that this is in fact a Witcher reference. And I'm just going to bring this whole thing full circle really quickly. Barghests are actually not in the baseline Witcher 3 game, they only appear in the Blood and Wine DLC. And I swear we are done talking about it now.
Searching around the gate for Songbird, V is hit with a powerful bout of, well, something. It's not the relic malfunctioning, we know what that looks like, and at any rate, this is much worse. That's when we see her. Songbird. She introduces herself, and then she just shuts Johnny off, like that motherfucker. It's a pretty strong character opening, I'm not gonna lie. Songbird is communicating with us via the relic, and basically shuts Johnny down to save on power.
I actually thought this was going to be an excuse to have Keanu Reeves not be present for Phantom Liberty, but no, he's still present for pretty much all of it.
Songbird explains that she's aboard Space Force 1, a ship set to crash right into Dogtown, and with communications jammed, we're her only method of contact. The next 10 or so minutes see us wandering through the bowels of Dogtown in an attempt to gain access to the area proper, with Songbird delivering exposition along the way. She explains that she's an NUS intelligence analyst, a powerful netrunner. At the construction site, we get a very close-up encounter with the crashing of Space Force 1, and we also have to deal with my least favorite quest, maybe in the entire game. I will give them credit again. This is another incredibly powerful opening.
Fun fact, you can fail this mission by fucking off right here, thus ending the DLC early. That's a neat touch.
I hate this mission because of how tedious it is, at least on the difficulty I was playing on. Once you get inside Space Force 1, you and Myers, the president, Songbird's not there, have to fight your way out of it by killing everything, so you're basically pinned down in here. Most of this, for me, was just waiting for my shit to come off cooldown so I could keep throwing grenades. Trying to walk outside was essentially suicide. This whole section took me almost an hour. It was so incredibly painful. While we lead Myers through Dogtown, we encounter a series of exhibits that Songbird tells us to ask the president about. Songbird disagrees with every explanation the president gives, an indicator that the two were not, in fact, operating in perfect harmony. To skip ahead because we have a lot of ground to cover, Songbird tries to use this big machine thingy. It goes poorly, we have to destroy it. The President and V end up hiding in a rundown apartment for the night. Johnny will also comment on how the whole situation feels funny, like someone isn't giving us the full story here. The next day, we're told to contact a sleeper agent by the name of Solomon Reed. We have to call him up using an old payphone in an abandoned restaurant. Myers also asks us to take up the oath of an FIA agent, which I decline. I love the little interaction Johnny has with you when he teaches you how to use a payphone. It's super charming. Our mystery man instructs us to meet him on the basketball court in Dogtown. A gun to our back is our introduction to Solomon Reed, played by Idris Elba, this DLC's newfound celebrity cameo. Reed is an interesting character whose defining trait is undoubtedly loyalty, in a variety of different ways. We meet with the President and basically lay out the plan for the DLC, as we learn more about the dubious nature of the President. Reed went into hiding because he was nearly killed by Arasaka, which the President conveniently did not mention. The plan is to rescue Somi, Songbird, and it seems like everyone has different reasons for doing this. Reed feels some sense of responsibility, but what that responsibility is not made clear to us. Myers, on the other hand, seems to be concerned about matters of security when it comes to the NUSA. The game does what it does best, make us wait. Except, because I was determined to do all the DLC at once, we don't really bounce around here. Instead, I just do various DLC missions, which will be important later. Reed tells us to go to a bar in the area to meet with another undercover agent to help us track down Somi, somebody by the name of Alex. Reed also casually reveals that he never told Alex his cover was, well, cover. So that blows up in our faces nicely. We can start to realize here that the level of personal drama between these characters, as this is the most obvious example of it, above Songbird's passive remarks about the President, is incredibly high. Alex takes a little convincing, but she does agree to help us after telling us about the last mission of Songbird, her, and Reed. It didn't end well. After promising her that this will be her last mission, she explains that since Somi got disconnected during the Chimera attack, that's the big beast, a netrunner might be able to find out what happened. Spoiler alert, it's the Blackwall Protocol. That's how she was communicating with us, and oh boy is it dangerous. Slider here manages to re-establish contact with Songbird, who is incredibly surprised to see Reed. She's been captured by Kurt Hansen, the leader of Dogtown, and the best course of action is to crash a party he's throwing at the Black Sapphire, the massive building at the center of Dogtown. We get to this party through Mr. Hands, who plays a much more prominent role in this DLC than he does in the base game. He also gets a complete overhaul from the original base game. I do not know why. We do some gigs for him, he gives us the blueprints for Hansen's hotel. What follows is my favorite quest in the entire game. I've seen people liken this DLC to a spy thriller, which I'm inclined to agree with. If that's the case, then infiltrating the Sapphire is our first big spy mission. It involves stealth, recon, deception, and being a sniper. It's a really long mission, but easily the most fun I had playing the game. Plus, the penthouse of the Black Sapphire is beautiful to look at once we get there. The sneaking in part is fun and all, but I really enjoy the recon we have to do once we get to the top of the building. Almost every important Night City NPC is here, including Maiko if you haven't killed her yet. We eventually find Song on the balcony, the personal guest of Hansen. Given that she's only ever been a construct in our head until now, seeing her in person is a little bit of a different experience. She's almost completely machine, definitely not like how she represents herself on the relic. Song tries to apologize to Reed, but he tells her that he understands. She was forced into a corner. She was actually the one who tried to kill him, at the orders of someone else. Somi is dying too, at the hands of the Blackwall, and Kurt Hansen has the cure that we both need. All we need is a way to steal it from him. We meet Kurt face to face, who largely seems to recognize we don't belong here, but he takes Somi away without making a scene. The main takeaway here is that Songbird has known a lot more than she ever let on. The fact that Kurt had a cure was clearly info she always had, but just declined to tell us until now.
The Neural Matrix is an AI that reads kind of like a genie in a bottle. Hansen pulled it out of a bunker and Songbird knows how to open it. She just needs the codes to do so. The plan is simple. We replace the two people who have the access codes and pose as them to meet with Hansen again.
If you haven't figured it out by now, the game point blank tells us that Songbird is responsible for the downing of Space Force 1. She crashed the ship in Dogtown, the exact location of the thing that she needs. She tried to save the president, sure, but her plan was still to use her to bargain with Hansen. Reed still wants to go forward with our plan, in spite of the betrayal he feels here. Rescue her first, act later. So now we have to talk to the runners. I love the Cassell twins. They're so weird and charming. It's a shame that we don't get to see more of them in this DLC, honestly. At the end of our little chat, Kurt comes back to have a second conversation with us, this time without any sense of theatrics. He's not pretending this time around. He explains to us what we already knew. Song came to him to escape, and now she's kinda stuck. Now it's time to get facial reconstruction surgery. Actually, we just need the behavioral implant thing like Alex has so we can impersonate the Cassells. While we're setting up our plan, Song reaches out to us again, asking us to meet somewhere specific, as a sign of her trust. We meet her in a heavily vegetated area of Dogtown, where she finally admits her part in all this. She had a plan, and it did not work out for her at all. Hansen believes that whatever is on that matrix will help him against the NUS, but he doesn't know what's on it though. It's hard not to empathize with Somi here from my perspective. She's an unwilling weapon, infected by the Black Wall by someone who cares very little, if at all, for her well-being. She wants to be free, and she's doing anything she can to get it. I don't feel I need to explain the parallels. Her issue with Reed is that he basically strong-armed her into working for the NUS, and even after they wronged him too, he continued to serve. She has a different plan than the one that's been offered to us by everyone else. Once we nab the Matrix, we leave. Without all of them. We would, of course, be betraying everyone else, but for now we don't need to worry about that. Reed meets us at the clinic where we're going to get the implant. He offers a different plan. He still wants to capture Songbird, but he intends to try and help her avoid prison, if possible. He still wants to catch her though, just instead of letting her escape, he wants to ask her some questions. It honestly sounds like he still holds something of a grudge against her. You use some tech to incapacitate her while she's vulnerable during the extraction of the Matrix and work out the rest from there.
Assuming I take Reed at his word here, would he even really have the power to save her? Could he really protect her from Myers?
With the implant in our possession, we're primed to steal a car, dispose of the Cassells, assume their position, and meet with Kurt. Remembering what happened with the Cassells in the casino is as important as reading the little blurb that the game gives you on Aurora. We manage to convince Kurt that we're really the Cassells, and we get to meet with Somi to give her the codes. This right here is the story's most critical juncture. You can either follow her with her plan to escape, or Reed's plan to incapacitate her.
I'll encourage everyone to play this for themselves if they haven't already, but much like with the main story, I'm not covering all the endings. I'm just covering the ending that I chose, which in my case was to side with Songbird.
Alex immediately kills Kurt, but Songbird activates the defenses for the entire stadium, the Black Wall overloading her in the process. All Alex and Reed can do is watch as we walk out of the lab without them. We have to fight our way out of the stadium, collecting our stuff as we go out. I also stopped to loot Hansen's corpse on the way out, professional courtesy. Somi struggles to even stay upright as we make our way through the stadium. The Black Wall has taken its toll on her, a familiar sight. We have to wait a few days to hear from Songbird, but when we eventually do, we meet her in the back of a van. Reed calls us first. He seems to have fallen back into his position as an FIA agent, saying that we could have helped her, but now we're both traitors. The plan here is to get to the spaceport, fly her to the moon, and then she'll send for us once the cure is ready. We head to the spaceport, we enter normally, sneak into the Tycho terminal, and let Songbird in. From there, she'll take the flight to the moon. The plan actually starts out pretty smoothly. We manage to sneak her in without raising suspicions. I don't feel I need to explain that this doesn't last long. The NUSA shows up, Myers shows up, with Reed in tow. Orbital Air has alerted them to our presence, but it doesn't seem like they know exactly what's going on here. This will become more apparent very quickly. Myers orders Somi killed, and Reed does not argue. The instructions are clear. The plan is to absolutely light up the terminal until they catch us, or kill us. Orbital Air seems to disagree with this assessment. We have the mother of all fights at the Maglev station, and even get to wield Songbird's Black Wall power to kill some of them. Quite the power trip. Once aboard the train to the launch pad, Song finally reveals the last piece of information she's been holding on to. She's been lying to us this entire time. The cure, it only works once. It's basically a genie in a bottle. You use it, and then it's gone. From here, we have one more crucial choice to make. We can turn Song over, take the cure for ourselves, or help her make it to the moon anyways. In spite of it, I can't bring myself to be mad at her. After all, what she's done, it feels a lot like what we've spent the entire game doing. We may have another path to success, if endings like the Star are anything to go by. But here and now, this is her last chance, and I have the power to help her. Reed beats us to the ship, though, and we have to deal with him again. Reed lays the responsibility for everything at our feet, claims only death awaits her on the moon. We can tell Reed that she never forgave herself for what she had to do to him, and that doing this to her will only cause the same issue for him. But it doesn't matter now. He says that she can't be responsible for starting another war. This secret can't get out. In truth, nothing we can say here will make Reed back down, only handing Songbird over. But since I refuse to do that, instead we draw our weapons, and V kills Reed. His loyalty to the NUSA, his refusal to change his perspective, to understand her, to understand us. It only had one ending. This ending. We watch her take off in the rocket. We can have a talk with Johnny about his failure to do what she did. It's one of the most open moments Johnny has in the entire game. This whole thing works better as the last thing you do in a playthrough, but then I wouldn't get to play with all the fun toys that this offers us. 2077 has no New Game Plus feature.
I would almost argue that this DLC makes the entire game worth it. The main story is great, but the DLC is in a league of its own. It manages to get you invested in these three characters so quickly. It's almost kind of impressive. When you boil down Phantom Liberty, the story is really about the complicated personal relationships between these four people. The complicated, messy history they have, and the ways in which they try and navigate it. I would argue that neither Reed, Alex, nor Songbird are bad people. Each one has their misgivings, but none of them are malicious. They simply have too many problems, too much baggage. No matter how you tackle this story, somebody comes out on the bottom. Sometimes it's Reed, sometimes it's Alex, sometimes it's Songbird. Almost always, though, it's you. This is a message the main story tries to get across, but I think some of the endings are more optimistic than others. You can do the Star ending and convince yourself that everything's going to be okay. Even if we take the cure from Song, we end up in a 2-year coma. Everyone around us moves on, except Carrie because he's the realest motherfucker there is. But by and large, the game does not let us pretend like everything's going to be okay here.
The credits roll, and I'm left thinking about how much I genuinely cared for Reed. Wanted him and Song to actually talk and make peace. How I wanted the three of them to end on better terms. But that ending will never come. No matter what you say or what you do. This ending is the perfect embodiment of the game's core ideal. There is no happy ending in Night City. Not for people like us.
I feel guilty for spoiling this whole thing. I think my thoughts work best when we all understand what I'm talking about, but in my crusade to get everyone to play this game, I have to pull back the curtain on it. I went into this game blind, and I'm happier for it, but anyone who wanted to do that now will have at least some part of the game spoiled for them and laid bare in the process. I don't think that it takes away from the incentive to play, but I think it impacts how the ending feels if you know how it's going to play out. Does Reed's death mean as much to you if you know it's inevitable?
There are few games who I think have sat at both ends of the quality spectrum. Some games may start good but end up bad. Some games start bad and languish there until they're inevitably cancelled. Mostly, though, I think games languish in the realm of mediocrity. Even games I like fall into this camp.
I think it's important to recognize that you can enjoy something while also acknowledging that it's not necessarily good. Tons of people have guilty pleasure shows. I'm pretty sure that's the main business model of reality TV. The only real examples of games making this level of turnaround that I can think of are 2077 and No Man's Sky. To hunker down on a project like this is something other studios just don't seem to have the time or energy to do. It is a little interesting to me that these are both sci-fi games.
I came into this game with no expectations, no knowledge of the existing franchise, and the bare minimum knowledge about the game and its marketing, and I came away with an experience that has pulled me back in time and time again. Starting this project, I had 457 hours in this game. By the end of it, I had 534, all from doing my recordings for this analysis. And there's so much stuff that I failed to either play or discuss in this video. For as long as I've spoken, I feel as though I have only scratched the surface of this game.
One major section I cut from this review was my discussion of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, the animated series that borrows heavily from CDPR's work in the universe. This show is one of my favorites of all time, and maybe if people have enough interest I might consider doing a companion piece to this video, but I felt it strayed too far from the topic, as well as inflating the runtime. Making an open world game of any kind takes a lot of effort. There's a reason we don't see indie developers attempting this kind of thing. Having said that, the effort does not inherently make the product successful or even good. I love exploring worlds like these. There's a reason the genre is so incredibly popular. But I think it's all the more rewarding when you can make a world that looks good and is actually worth exploring. It's what sets Night City apart from something like a generic Ubisoft open world game. I've had a lot of fun playing through Frontiers of Pandora, but I recognize that it's not necessarily high art. It's every bit the characters as it is the world when it comes to Cyberpunk, and that's not something that CDPR can take credit for. The franchise clearly had strong roots. I don't think CDPR would have been interested in adapting the setting to begin with if that wasn't the case, because at that point you might as well just create your own dystopia world instead. The one thing I'll never accuse CD Projekt Red of is not caring, because I don't believe that. They didn't make the Cyberpunk franchise. They didn't make the Witcher franchise. But it's undeniable that they gave a voice and an image to these things when they didn't really have one. Something that both franchises continue to use to this day. They made a Cyberpunk Netflix series, and the whole thing has deeply ingrained roots from CDPR's world of Cyberpunk down to the sound design. I didn't write this whole essay just to talk up this game, but even trying to be objective, it's hard not to see the effort and want to be more forgiving. I think people tend to get lost in that when it comes to negative reception. People get mad because they spent their hard-earned money on something and they feel as though it was not worth it. And I mean, that's a justified response, but I still think that they place the blame a little too liberally, and maybe not with the best faith criticism. Maybe that's just my optimism talking again. It's hard to say. Cyberpunk is a game that asks you how you want to be remembered, and it's a question the game has also seemingly asked itself.
I feel pretty comfortable saying that the game will be remembered fondly. A wild thought given the hate that it met on release. Video games are a medium with complexity that others do not have to deal with. We complain about long development times, but that's just the system you need in order to maintain a healthy work-life balance while releasing a polished and complete project. Games in years past were able to release faster because the industry was not regulating itself in this way. People were being overworked.
Cyberpunk, to me, was a victim of circumstance. The push to release the game was a common sentiment, and the truth was it just wasn't ready. But more important than a rocky launch is a drive to correct your mistake. And there's no doubt in my mind that they worked to improve the game. The game's biggest send-off, Phantom Liberty, is one of, if not the greatest, DLCs I've ever played, and with Cyberpunk 2 slated for release somewhere on the horizon, I'm happy to wait as long as it takes to see if we get something that's just as satisfying to play. When I started making these essays, I said that my top 3 games were Pokemon Black, The Witcher 3, and Portal 2, but I've changed my mind. Nothing can dethrone Pokemon, partially due to nostalgia, but Cyberpunk 2077 is both a game I had a ton of fun with and deeply love thinking about. And isn't that the point of the genre?
Thank you, everyone, for watching. This is without a doubt my favorite video that I've made to date, and I'm actually a little sad that I have to be finished working on it now, but I'm very excited to get it out there for everyone to experience. I've decided to make shorter stuff for a little bit moving forward. Making these really long essays is fun, but time-consuming, so stick around for what's coming next because I already have some ideas in the works. Thanks.